much, everyone. Just a little bit of housework first. If everybody could keep their microphones on mute until they're actually ready to speak, that's really helpful, because there's always other extraneous noise going on that we can never really keep control of. Okay, so I shall start. I've got a preamble to read, which I'll go through for you. This inquiry is being held virtually using Microsoft Teams. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to today's session. I'm Councillor Peter LeBroy, Chairman of this inquiry process. I'm joined by, hopefully, if they're all here, Councillors Lee Frost, Jim McKenna, Mike McLenning and Jane Pascoe. We are supported today by David Robber, our Economic Growth Manager, and our Technical Officer, and Lynn Davey, our Democratic and Governance Officer, who has oversight of this process. The session is not being held in public, but a recording will be made available on the Council's website for viewing by the public. The objectives from the inquiry terms of reference are as follows. Number one, to review the current state of the economy in rural and coastal areas in Cornwall and consider future economic forecasts if current trends continue, for example, sector mix, economic performance, employment, salary levels, population levels and so on. And also to consider the necessary and desirable interactions between the rural economy and local towns in Cornwall. Number two, to consider what support is already available and planned for rural and coastal areas in Cornwall, and to investigate alternative methods of stimulating the economy of rural and coastal areas. And through that process, we'll probably take evidence from other parts of the United Kingdom and the European Union. Number three, to consider the potential impact of different intervention strategies, and to make recommendations on how Cornwall Council can contribute and support the development of the economy in rural and coastal areas in Cornwall. The process consists of a number of recorded evidence gathering sessions supported by organisational sessions and initial briefing information. This is our second formal recorded evidence gathering session where we are taking evidence from witnesses who have particular experience and knowledge to help us. We value the input of all those witnesses who give up their valuable time to take part in our process and thank them for their input. With regard to the questioning of our witness, the process for each will be the same. Each witness will be asked to briefly introduce themselves, then to allow approximately 10 to 15 minutes for that expert witness to present their views and position on rural and coastal vitality in Cornwall, and to outline 3 or 4 recommendations that they feel would help stimulate rural and coastal areas. Only panel members may ask the witnesses questions. Other members are very welcome to attend and observe proceedings, and I'll give them the opportunity to comment at the end of each witness section. Although if time becomes limited, this may need to be at the end of the evidence gathering session as a whole. Due to limited time, I will try to ensure that questions and answers are kept as succinct as possible, particularly as there could be supplementary questions based on responses to other questions. Further written clarifications may be sought if necessary. All questions or responses are to come through me as the chair in the chat box, please. If you wish to speak, it's an X in the chat box and I will do my best to respond to you. Once witnesses have finished evidence, they're welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting as an observer. The evidence from the sessions will be used to support findings and recommendations of the panel. Okay, so thank you very much for being patient with me. That's the preamble and gets us in the right frame of mind for where we're going. And our first witness today, very grateful to have Mr. Richardson, Mr. Edward Richardson, who's the Farm Business Advisor of Farm Cornwall. So good afternoon, Mr. Richardson. And you're very, very welcome to state your piece.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. As I'm told, my name is Edward Richardson. I work as a farm business and rural outreach worker for Farm Cornwall. Farm Cornwall was set up in 2001 in West Cornwall by a group of young farmers and by a group of interested landowners to support those farmers which found themselves in difficulty, be that family difficulty or be that financial difficulty or successional issues. Over the years, the organisation has grown in the land it covers. Initially, it sort of went and covered the area and covered Kerrier, and now it covers the whole of the county from Penzance to Saltash and Bude, with just myself. I think that is an issue going forward in that our ability and our capacity to do all the work that we are presented with. Our referrals come from the banks, comes from vets, comes from neighbours or concerned farmers or concerned family relatives of what may be going on that farm. We see a number of farms that would be quite well indebted to the banks, and often that bank has asked us to go and see them. Depending on that level of support they would require and the level of investment, we are supported by the Prince's Countryside Fund and the Duchy of Cornwall and the Garfield Western Trust. The Garfield Western is Fortnum and Mason's, and we receive charitable funding to do that. It costs about 60,000 a year to run the project, and we have recently taken part with a project with DEFRA, along with 8 other farm charitable organisations, to assess what it costs to run an organisation like ours and what return we would return to the community. And it's worked out for every pound that we receive, that we give back to the community, something like I think it calculates at £13.18. So that, if it's multiplied out, is something just over £800,000 worth of support that we give back to the community in terms of assisting farmers who get into financial difficulty, assisting with succession issues, helping those farmers who are exiting agriculture, be that as tenants, then looking for housing, or in terms of they may have a property to have themselves to move to, but there's all the unwinding of that issue of that farm and how it's to be done. We also have a farm women's group, which unfortunately just started just before COVID-19. And we have 59 members on that, and it's really just it started out as monthly meetings where we've gone round local events. There's a sort of Facebook or support through it, and then we've had a few. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough traction with it just before COVID-19 to get it going. We're also involved with the Prince's Countryside Fund in supporting farmers through what's called the Prince's Countryside Resilience Programme. And we have trained some 90+ farmers in business. So that's looking at benchmarking between farms. It is cost control. It's looking at their accounts, looking at succession, looking at the new ELM scheme, and looking at trying to sort of, instead of 20 years just going past, it's trying to get 5-year program. Where have we got to? What are we going to do next? And where's this business going? So that's been completed with 4 groups. It's been completed with 3.5 groups. We're just waiting halfway through with our 4th year group, which is meeting at Wadebridge, and we are just recruiting now for a 5th year group. And how we make that function with COVID-19 is going to be some difficulty, and may in fact be opted out, and we run it again next year. We also run a beef group where we run those through, and again through benchmarking. So they're a spin-off really of the resilience program. This is getting a group of like-minded beef farmers together using ADHB, which is the Animal and Horticultural Development Board, to monitor those farms, how are they performing, and then comparing each of those beef farms with each other so that they can learn from each other and improve their own businesses. Issues that we are seeing on farms, clearly we've had the Brexit vote, and next year we will be coming out of the European Union. The government has set up, at the moment, just seems to be one way forward, or one scheme by which farming will come out of the basic payment scheme. Farmers currently are receiving some £90 an acre flat rate payment, depending on the exchange rate with the euro pound. So for it doesn't matter whether they're pigs, beef, dairy, cauliflowers, daffodils, no matter what it is, they will receive £90 an acre. That scheme is to go in 2027, and between now and 2027, that money is meant to fade out. What we know so far, is that the rate of decline in year 1 will be at 5% for those farmers that are in receipt of £30,000 less basic payment scheme. It is forecast that it is likely to increase at a faster rate, but we don't know what that faster rate is going to come in. The new ELMS scheme, Environmental Land Management Scheme, is meant to start in 2024. And this is split into 3 tiers, where the first tier is each farm can enter on an individual basis, very much like the current countryside stewardship scheme, and payment levels probably are going to be much the same as the current countryside stewardship scheme. It is, at the moment, the countryside stewardship is income foregone. So if you put a new fence up, they will pay you to put a new fence up. There isn't any extra money in it. If you go into sort of putting wildflower meadows in, there is a rate for doing it, but you're not really making that much money out of it. There is the second tier. That is only available where farmers come together in groups. And then the upper tier is only available with where they come together in groups. And it is estimated, my understanding at the moment, that the money value for that top level is likely to be something like 60% of the current basic payment scheme at best. My concern is that it is easy to get groups where there is a natural grouping, say around Bodmin Moor, Penrith Moors, Camel Valley, but those areas around Bude, Liscard, Hale Estuary, where there isn't a natural grouping of farmers, it won't be easy to bring those farmers together. The second issue I would say around that is, whilst we as an organisation may be able to facilitate some of that grouping, I think there needs to be some real effort for bringing either farmers to do it or other organisations like Cornwall Wildlife Trust and others to be able to bring those groups together to for them to access that better value of the money. The reason for having groups is they believe, or their own evidence would tell you, that that wildlife isn't moving from farm to farm to farm unless there is some level of link between each farm. The second sort of issue I would say is, because there's so little information on ELMS, farmers are concerned that, well, we don't know what it's doing, we don't know what it's going to look like, we don't know what its going to payment levels are going to be like. How do we plan for what's going forward? We really don't know. And there was a good comment in the Farmers Weekly a few weeks ago which basically said all ELMS is at the moment is a heading, and I think that, apart from the information I've given you, that's about where it stands. So when you talk to farmers, they're concerned about what they're doing, they don't know what to invest in, they don't know where to invest. The prices of milk, beef, lamb, cereals have been good over the last 12 months, which is surprising given the Brexit issue. We don't really know what's going to happen next. The issue of labour is a concern, particularly where we employ lots of people on picking jobs, on cauliflowers, potatoes, daffodils. What's going to happen to that? There is some talk of a seasonal agricultural worker scheme. We ourselves tried a scheme to put together. We had 750 people who applied online to our own website. We had 2 farmers who were interested in the scheme. I put 500 names to one of those farmers. He selected 120 people. 12 agreed to come and work. 7 turned up on the day, and by the end of the week there's only 3 left. So not the best way forward, but we need to be looking at how we can do, how are we going to recruit people, not just for those picking jobs, but also for the ordinary jobs, the milking cows, the driving tractors, the crop jobs. How are we going to recruit people to do those jobs? And they're quite well paid jobs. You know, they're 20, 25,000. Somebody milking cows could be on 35, 40,000 in a house. So they're good workers, but it's trying to encourage them that could be a job that they could do. I think another issue I would say is leader funding was a really good scheme in the past, and it enabled things, you know, farmers to put up farm shops, to process food into sausages or process drinks, and that has completely come to an end. So how are we going to get that diversification we need in the future? If you look at a recent report by Farm Business Survey, it said that total profit from the production of food across the whole of UK on total farms was zero. The total profit for farms in that period, so that's 2018-2019, was 3.5 billion, and that profit was made up of subsidy and diversification. The amount of money given by government to farmers, 3.5 billion. So the alarming figure is, for the production of food, the average income on farms for whatever it was, whether it was milk, beef or lamb, was zero. So it is a worrying figure. The next thing I think is I would talk about within the farming industry. They're getting older. There's a succession issue. There is a worry, I think. There's an isolation over the next period. They're not getting out under COVID-19. We have started some sort of early breakfast clubs, but obviously next come Thursday, that's come to an end. But there is they've had a good summer. They've never stopped working right throughout COVID. And now they're coming to a situation where the nights are drawing in, all the work's being done, it's winter work. Markets are very limited. The Truro, Allworthy and Ellsworthy markets are just what they call drop and go. So animals are dropped off. You can get into the ring if you're a seller, or if you're and the buyers are marked off around the ring. It's a very isolated, lack of communication. It isn't like a normal market would be. What else would I say? The other thing I would say is County Farm Service. County Farm Service has 11,000 hectares, 11,000 acres of land right across the county. Those tenancies, as they're coming up, we're looking at those tenancies being on quite short tenancies. If you look at a lot of them, there's been a real lack of investment in farm buildings, and those farm buildings are coming to the end of their life. So what is Cornwall Council going to do about those tenancies? And because they're on very short tenancies, the 10, 15, 20 years, is the farmer going to put up a new building? I think very much what they're going to do, if they are going to invest, is in things that they can pick up and go and move to the next tenancy. They're going to be tractors, they're going to be machinery, it's going to be livestock. So unless that farmer's got some infrastructure, and that applies to, I would say, to the same would go for Blytho Estates, Tregothon Estates, for Connacht National Trust Estates. They're all in a very similar situation. They haven't had a lot of buildings put over them for the last 15, 20 years. I would say that succession would be my other one. I would think it's something that we are beginning to see more and more involved with, sort of family discussions around succession. How do we deal with the elderly population who are leaving? What about their care costs and how that links to the asset of the farm and how they're going to be looked after in the future? Are the young ones going to be coming in, and are they there to take the farm on, or is the farm going to be let and to somebody else? I've recently been involved with 3 farms who've taken on young people. One is 4 brothers going to go into milking, another one in his 30s is going to go into milking, and another one who's come down as a share agreement. There are youngsters, and they do need to be supported in some way, either through share farms. They are going to be our future. We can't just keep letting the elderly be the answer to how the farms are being run. And the elderly need to retire properly. They can't just come to the end of their life having got no asset left in the farm. They come to the end of the tenancy. How are we going to house them? Often they do not have enough of a figure to buy a house. They might have enough to rent a house, but they're only going to be on basically old age pension. There isn't, when you look at some of the farm tenancies I see, very little spare capital going into retirement, and what are they going to do? So that would be it for now.
Okay, Edward, thank you very much indeed. You're sort of painting what seems like a little bit of a gloomy picture in farming, but there are young people still wanting to go into it. Is it entirely lifestyle choice? Because presumably it's not it's very difficult for somebody in a tenanted farm, by the sound of what you're saying, to be able to make a profit that is sustainable.
I think they tend to be young farmers already. So they have a background or that support from father that there has got some land. I think they're finding it very difficult that perhaps that existing farm at home has, say, 2 brothers already or 2 families taking out, and then along comes the next generation. Then they're in their late 20s and 30s. How does that farm afford another generation to live off it? And in these particular instances, one of them is 4 brothers who've been offered extra land. The tenancy has been extended. There will be an issue as those brothers move out from the farmhouse. Where are they going to live and how are they going to afford that? They are going to go into milk production. The other one is again is the next generation, couldn't afford to farm at home, has taken some cows with him and some money away from the farm to be able to set up on his own. The third one is coming in as a share farm, so they've moved down from up country to move in to sort of work together with an elderly couple who have no succession at all. So I think we've got to find a way to how those youngsters can get in, whether that's share farming, however that's done, or short-term tenancies. And we've also got to find a way in which the elderly farmer can get out on either for other farms to become bigger, or for the opportunities to come in.
Okay, thanks, Edward. Okay, so to my panel, we've got 3 councillors here today. In alphabetical order from using their first names, I've got Jane Pascoe, Councillor Jim McKenna and Councillor Mike McLenning. And I'm going to ask them in turn to have a few words with you, if that's okay. Jim, I see your X in the box, thank you, but you've fallen out of the alphabetical challenge. You're going to come second.
The name's James. The name's James.
James coming first, please.
I'm first, or James? I'm sorry, I didn't catch. For me?
Councillor Jane Pascoe, please.
Thank
Jane Pascoe.
Yeah, good afternoon. I am Councillor Jane Pascoe, and my division is Liskeard West and Dog Walls.
Yeah.
Farming, agriculture, food farming and agriculture is a huge interest to me, because what goes on in the hinterland affects all sorts of things in the towns as well, and we know the importance of it. And I'm hearing what you're saying. I do get to speak to lots and lots of farmers, particularly recently of the decline or the closure of Liskeard livestock market. We've been having pop-up seasonal sheep sales in Liskeard, which have been really, really popular, and for many reasons. I've gone along to them to talk to the farmers, and some of those reasons are for their mental well-being, to be able to talk to other farmers, to get together where they can talk about these grants or subsidies or help, because when you get in a gathering like that, they're able to discuss it, and somebody might not have heard something. So I think that's most important. Now, we have David Rodder here as well, and I know he thinks that the market should be centralised. And as you know from Liskeard, the nearest one is either Truro or Holsworthy Exeter, which is a long, long way for South East Cornwall. If it's a small farmer with not so many livestock that they want to take to market. The animal welfare of the less food miles is very important to them as well, and that the time away from the farm is also important. And I would like to see more support. Obviously, we're not talking about a full livestock market as we used to know them, because I know a lot of people sell dead weight, but there are occasions where I think these seasonal sales for the farmers are hugely useful and beneficial. The other thing I was going to ask you, and I'm really interested, I've not been on the farms panel, I wished I had been, is that I do hear from younger generations of farms who cannot get the tenancies for the Cornwall farms, the county farms, and I know they're reducing them for obvious reasons, but perhaps do you consider we're going in the wrong direction and Cornwall Council should be increasing the number of county farms, investing more into them, and so helping this younger generation? Because food and sustainability of Cornwall is so important at this time, isn't it? So that would be my question to you. Have we got that wrong? Should we be increasing the opportunities for the younger generations? The other thing I see against them too is when you have got a younger generation wanting to take on the farm, the older generation might be of my age, retirement age, but still pretty fit and active, who still can play a part in it, but they need extra accommodation. And I often see, because the farm accounts don't stack up as far as the county land agent is concerned, they can't get planning to build a small other residence for the outgoing retiring couple or the young couple coming on. And I see that as a problem too. And I wondered if you do.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pick up your last point first. I would agree entirely that often that farmer is stuck there because they've got nowhere to go. And I do think, and I think probably Jim will pick up on this, the Penwith Landscape Partnership has set up a scheme called Buildings in the Landscape. So this is to utilise redundant farm buildings, and give it some support with, so a little bit of grant aid in terms of planning, business plans, surveys, to enable that to be converted into accommodation or for further use for a diversification. Some of it has done, it's been a very slow burn, but right across the county there would be farm buildings in that sort of condition could be provided to enable either the next generation to be available on the farm or for the older generation to move out. So I think Cornwall Council has a role to play in enabling some of those redundant farm buildings to be used for allowing the next generation to come in or the older generation to go out. In terms of markets, I would support a new market in Cornwall. I think a new market needs to be built around the Launceston area. It's right on the side of the A30. It would pick up the Liskeard area, Bude, North Bodmin area, and whereas I think Holworthy, it's okay, but its buildings are on its way out. It's a bit off to one side, and again you need. Whereas I think a market, if it was encouraged, should be at Launceston. I think it would be good for the county. If you go to lots of other areas, I came down here from the northeast. Lots of areas have built some substantial good markets, and around those markets, a hub of activity develops around Cornwall farmers, the vets, the other support industries that are around there. So I think it would be good for the county if the county Cornwall Council were supportive of that. In terms of isolation, actually, we did, in fact, last Thursday hold a market meeting with farmers in Liskeard Cafe, and we've been trying to run supported sort of groups of no more than 6, obviously, and just get them out to a market, get them to talk, because there is isolation there. They've always had isolated, well, they haven't always had isolated jobs, but that the last 20 years, those become increasingly isolated. Their wives go out to work, their children are at school, and they're on the farm on their own. There is a health and safety issue there. Is that, what happens when something happens when they are on their own? They're getting older. In the past, they would have employed many staff, and it's often quite difficult to employ new members of staff onto those farms because they're expected to go in up and running. The farmer hasn't got the time to attach that young girl or young boy to an existing farm worker and bring them on, because they need to be able to come in, drive a tractor and milk cows almost from the get-go. And we need, Dutchy is brilliant at this, but it's how. And then often the other issue is, yes, a young lad or young girl can be in Camborne or Liskeard, and the farm work is 10 miles away, but there's no bus route, there's no vehicle, they can't afford a car yet. It's not like any other industry where they can just get the bus into Camborne or into Penzance. They've got to get from those towns out into the villages, and how they're going to do it. So, and County Farm Service, I think County Farm Service, yes, as terms of what happens in the rest of the country, Cornwall Council is very good, and I think something like 6 farms come up every year. I would say those farmers who need to get on it need to make sure that they are up. They start to build their livestock up elsewhere. So they've got maybe 100 sheep they're renting over there. They've got 50 head of cattle over there. But to me, the buildings on Cornwall Council farms have got to be better. The state of them, in some of them, is in a very poor state of disrepair, and it's unfair to put on the onus upon those new tenants coming in a full repair lease and then only 10 years. I think there needs to be a look at how that can be done, particularly when that farm comes to the end and they're 10 years down the road and they're now in their 40s and 50s and they're suddenly out on the rear. What happens to them? Okay.
Thanks, Edward.
Thank
Big
you.
This inquiry is a little bit about, or not a little bit about, a lot about the vitality of rural areas. Relocating Holworthy Market to Launceston is not something which I think I really want to support. I'd quite like it to stay in Holworthy, please, really. Jim McKenna, Councillor Jim McKenna, would you like to speak, please?
Councillor Peter Roy, thank you. Edward, hi, good afternoon.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. You're probably speaking from about 100 yards away from where I am, but good to see you again. I just, you mentioned the redundant farm buildings initiative. For those that don't know, Penwith has a landscape partnership which was awarded over £3 million worth of funding about 2.5 years ago from Heritage Lottery and a bit from Cornwall Council. So I guess we're in a privileged position because it does allow us at least to explore options in terms of making things more sustainable, a whole range of environmental initiatives, a whole range of Cornish language and sort of culture things as well. It's a fairly rounded thing. So if anybody wants to know more about that, then happy to talk to them. But in terms of the redundant buildings things, I think this picks up something that Jane mentioned earlier around, I don't know many farms, and I don't know many farms full stop, but those that I know, a lot of them have redundant buildings. A lot of them have buildings that are in danger of falling down, that are probably of some architectural and historic merit, but the planning system at the moment doesn't allow them to be brought back into use. And to my mind, that's a complete waste. So one of the things we are exploring is whether we can develop some amended planning guidance, which would allow, obviously with conditions, those who own or sort of operate farms to make more of the sort of built assets they have. So that would be one thing I would wholeheartedly endorse. And Edward, as this is an inquiry, I'd be looking for you to say, yes, well, we're being recorded, but I'm hoping you'd agree with that as an approach. If it works in West Penwith, it could potentially be rolled out, would be one thing. I think the second thing I'd like to know is you talked about the payments issue. Potentially there's going to be a gap. When the new system comes in, it's going to be less, significant less by the sound of it. So bearing in mind that things change in government and it's not due for implementation for a couple of years yet, would you think, this needs to be an open question, is there anything Cornwall Council could do to assist with lobbying to make the case better to government while there might still be an opportunity? And I think the third thing I wanted to ask was around county farms and the state of buildings and such. We do have a county farms panel, and I wondered what access you had to you or the sector had to make the case for some investment, because if they are Cornwall Council assets, the money isn't wasted, it's not disappearing or anything else. They're refreshing, they're increasing the value of what Cornwall Council has on its asset base, and that in turn potentially makes the chances of successful tenancies more likely. So those would be my questions for now. Thank you.
Okay. Right, the buildings in the landscape. I mean, the farmers do have access to this thing called queue planning, and it is converting a number of farm buildings quite rapidly into, but they tend to be turned over into holiday cottages. I think there has to be some encouragement somewhere to find those buildings so that they retain within agriculture for succession purposes or moving out elderly parents. So I think the scheme could be rolled out from Penwith, see how well it's doing and roll it out across the county. I'd like to see that happen. In terms of Cornwall Council's farms, I think I don't know if there's been a survey done of all the building stock that they have on the farms. I know they're having some instances amalgamated farms where they buff back to back, and that they have then reconfigured the buildings, sold off one of the farmhouses, and then probably given the don't necessarily give the farm a new building. You know, these buildings were put up in the 1960s and 70s. They're wooden frames. They're coming to the end of their lives. If the farmer is expected to be paying for full repair and lease on these properties, then a good modern building which suits modern tractors and livestock has to be there. If it's going to be a difficult old building because it's falling into disrepair, then that doesn't really encourage that farmer when he leaves that farm in 10-15 years time to leave it in good state of repair, because now it's another 15 years old. So I think some survey of what's been done in terms of our access to or input to, I know Johnny Alford and I know Russell Wheeler. Apart from that, we have no formal links with them to advise or support them. I think one thing that Cornwall Council could do as an organisation, I said earlier, and it is one thing government under the ELM is expecting that somewhere between 15 and 23% of lowland sheep, beef and cereal farms are expected to go under the new ELM scheme, and some 16% of upland livestock farms. The government is looking at how do they access those farms to give them support to enable them to go forward, invest, diversify, retire, whatever needs to be done. And they're looking to organisations like ourselves who have perhaps better access to those individual farms because they're already probably on the edge, and so farm charities have all got better access. But I think what Cornwall Council could do is give us the capacity to do that. One man covering Land's End to Saltash to Bude is a lot to do, and if that level of change is coming down the road, then how do we support those farmers do it? And we need to have capacity to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Edward. And Mike McLenning, your turn.
Okay.
Councillor, sorry.
Sorry. Okay.
Good afternoon, Edward. I'm Cornwall Council Mike McLenning from St Stephen in Brannell Division. I must admit, not one of my specialist subjects, but you know it off by heart, and I respect that you must have put a lot of your career into this subject. So I look at it from just a few points, really. Being a townie as well, I think you said it's a perfect presentation. I think you did yourself disjustice when you were talking about jobs, when you mentioned ordinary jobs, and I think you did yourself down a bit there because they sound as pretty important jobs. And I think that's the message which you probably slipped today, I would imagine, but I would imagine you make that clear. They're important jobs. It seems, if you talk about communities in general, and I talk about my own community, the youngsters aren't coming through to take over some of the roles in the community, whether it's going to be a chairman of this or a secretary of that. In a much bigger scale, you're listening to you're saying they're not coming forward, some of them, to take over parents. But I think that's the thing that's happening in every industry that's, if you like, local to communities of some aspect. And I also felt that perhaps, and I think someone said this before at some of our meetings, that we've somehow got to step up the training at second school, whatever you call them, the academies or second modern schools now, to step up education and training there on this subject and make it a specialist subject. Now, I could be out of touch there, but I never hear it much from the two schools in my division. So that's really I wanted to say, really. It's education, how the hell you crack succession interest, and really pushing those better than ordinary jobs.
Yeah. Okay. I think for a long time, agriculture has been seen as a, from an education point of view, as that's something you don't do. And horticulture has been seen as something where, as even of a lesser subject. I haven't know that myself because I had a background as a farm manager on Agriculture College in County Durham, and I have two children who've gone through, one of them into agriculture, is that it's never been something that you should be encouraged to do. And I think, and I've spoken to some farmers, I remember one farmer had a group of students from Duchy College taken round his farm, was milking 300 cows, and all the lads and girls were interested in was driving the tractor. And he said to them, do you know, he said, I can get people to drive a tractor at £10 an hour. And if you look on, when you look up and going up and down the A30, all those people who drive tractors are somewhere between below 30 or above 50. He said, what I can't find is people to come and milk cows. You know, it's a very skilled job. Its pay is very good. The requirements of being there, yes, it's a commitment to that job. You know, you have to be a herdsman. You have to have that instinct to understand livestock, that commitment that you are also producing food. I think it does need raising up. That this is a good job, milking cows. It may not be for everybody, but actually when you look at somebody earning probably 30,000 in the countryside and a full-time job, that's probably very different to many people who string together a number of jobs and still don't get to 30,000, and some of those will also get a house thrown in. I think it's quite difficult to recruit people to this, particularly to West Cornwall, because they're a long way from family friends, they're a long way from family. Often the house that's been let that you would have lived in 15, 20 years ago as a farm cottage is now a second home, and you're offered a mobile home. Well, I don't think they want to do it. They don't. Why should we live in a mobile home and not get a decent property? I think that's not going against the farmers. I see it all the time that I am constantly being asked for somebody to be able to leaf milk. Had a person move down from Shropshire quite recently, wanted to work on a farm. She'd worked with sheep, she'd worked with cattle, and I said, well, the best thing you could do is learn how to milk a cow. Go and speak to some local farmers, learn how to do it, and you will find that kind of work. There are people who retire from farming and can keep it going because they are, you know, they can all drive a tractor, they're well skilled, so they can just keep going. And that's why that second generation you see going up and down the A30 are those over 50 in their 30s and 40s with young children at home, having to work long hours driving vegetables or potatoes up and down the A30. So I do think it is something that needs to be done. We do need to get people back interested in agriculture. I think for a long time agriculture has been seen as it's too much like hard work. It's hard work, don't want to do it, you can earn more money elsewhere. But actually I think we're moving into a different situation, and the people needed in agriculture need to be on the board, intelligent, clever, practical people, and there are jobs out there for them.
Thank you. Now, I think I might be doing David Rodder a disservice because I did notice his hand went up a little while ago, then it went down, but now I think I can see an X in a box. So, David, would you like to come forward?
Yes, hi. No, don't worry. You're not doing me a disservice, Councillor LeProy. No problem at all. David Rodder, Economic Growth Manager for Cornwall Council. Hi, Edward. Good to see you.
Hello, David. How are you?
Very well, thank you. It was just a couple of points, really. One, to make members aware that the County Farms Service published a new strategy last year. So they went through an inquiry process, or certainly a consultation process, about the new revising the County Farms strategy. It is probably fair to say, and I think the service admitted it during that process, that the estate's been underinvested in for a number of years, and the new strategy is trying to address that somewhat. So I think there is more money going into the estate to try and bring it back up to modern standards. The council's investing in new dirty water systems that on dairy farms to capture the methane that comes off them, as a part of a European funded project that is then taking that methane, and we're going to be running vehicles in Cormac on biomethane produced on Cornish farms. So not only are we getting the environmental benefit of saving methane going to air, we're also going to be getting the economic benefit of buying that fuel from Cornwall rather than elsewhere. It is quite cutting edge technology, it's fair to say. You know, but if it works, it is something that could be rolled out. But the first 6, or I think the County Farm Service is putting 6 of those in, reinvesting in the estate. Part of that is also rationalisation. Edward picked up on that about amalgamating holdings to make them more viable, and there's a renewed ambition to help new entrants into the industry. So the Council Farms Estate sort of service strategy is, I put it in the chat box in terms of the link, but it's also on the council website. And secondly, just to clarify a point, Councillor Pascoe said I'm in favour of centralising markets, or a central market. Just to be clear on that, the market forces are driving that, and the rationalisation of markets. I'm not necessarily in favour of a one market solution, because I think that that causes other issues. But the market forces are driving the rationalisation in cattle markets across the country, not me.
Sorry, David, I wasn't pointing a finger.
Thank you both for that. Thank you both for that. So Edward, before we wind up with you, if it's okay, can we try and squeeze a top 3 wish list out of you of things that you would like us to sort of take out of our conversation with you?
Okay, I would look at how is Elms really understand Cornwall Council. How is Elms going to affect the county? In terms of, it's going to need some sort of facilitation for groups who are not around Bodmin Moor. There is already a trial test in Elms on the Lizard, where those natural groups don't exist really. So Hale Estuary, wherever they are, Bude, how is Cornwall Council going to encourage farmers and get those facilitation of those farmers to get them going? Secondly, if there is going to be such a change in agriculture that's heading our way, then organisations like our own need to have the capacity. So we're looking at putting in a second advisor in the north of the county. We can have that capacity to assist those farmers to develop their businesses. The ones, there will be those big farmers, and they can go to Anderson's and Lawrence Gould and the big companies, but there are going to be many small farmers who are going to struggle to find the advice and support that they need, and I think Farm Cornwall has the experience to do it, but we don't have the capacity to deal with that amount of change that's coming down the road. And the other thing, I think, to look at housing, agricultural housing. How can we get the farmers to retire with dignity, and how can we find space for those who are coming in the industry to live somewhere and work locally?
Lovely, thank you. And finally, Edward, can we just talk, because obviously most farms, I guess 99.9% of them are going to be in the countryside by dint of what they are. I suppose there might be a few city farms and town farms around. I don't know specifically in Cornwall if there are any of those at all. But how important is the relationship between the local towns to the people that live in the rural environment, particularly on farms? What is the relationship between, obviously, from the farmers and the occupiers of land looking towards the town, and equally the other way round, the reverse vision?
Well, I think from the other way, I mean, certainly lockdown has identified that the farms provide a resource of somewhere to go and walk, to see the countryside, to relax, to see where it is. I think farms provide that local source of food, obviously. I think the towns need to be supportive of farmers markets, need to be supportive of trying to use, and council could be supportive in terms of buying locally as well. In the past, you would have seen that the farmer would have been, or some research done by Prince's Countryside Fund, he would have been the parish councillor, and he would have made sure when a tree fell on the road that he cleaned it up. He would have been the person who was the snow plough. I don't know if Cornwall Council do that anymore, but he was the one who provided the bales and everything for the events, the pasty day, the Lafrauda, whatever it is. The farmer provided that source. If we move to a situation where farmers become bigger and bigger, and the example that Prince's Countryside found was that in one particular village somewhere in the southwest, and they didn't say where it was, in 1968, the number of the farms were all around the village centre. They then sold those houses, and they still lived in the village, but they built bigger barns further out of the village. I think at the beginning, I can't remember how many farms there were originally. Then there were 6, and now there are no farms in that parish. It's all farmed by somebody else from outside the parish, and so now you're losing that connection to the person who drives the snowplow, cuts the tree when it falls on the road, provides the bales for everything. It's if we accept that farms are going to get bigger, there is going to be a huge change in the countryside where it becomes even more further away from us. And that when the people come on a visit to Cornwall, they want to be able to see those small farms. They want to be able to see that landscape that is provided by small family farms. If we lose the family farm, then I think we have lost an enormous amount from the countryside. That involvement with what goes on.
Okay, thank you very much, but I'm sort of trying to wind it up now with you because we've already run 7 minutes over time, if that's okay. But I can see that Councillor McClenning has put an X in his box. Mike, do you want to put a quick point forward, or have you covered?
I just had a thought, really. If you're struggling to get succession down here, and we get mud thrown at us that people from outside the county are moving in and taking all the affordable housing, does that mean you need to attract people to work on these farms from outside Cornwall, just because you've got a business to run, and it can't be neglected? Thank you.
I think you've got to do that. Yeah, you've got to be able to attract them somehow with a good proposition. If you want a good cowman to come in, very often they're local, and there's very few that are. But I think that's what you've got to do. And in some instances, you'll see some of those positions held by Eastern Europeans. These are not just people who are picking fruit and vegetables, but people who are full-time working on the farm are increasingly becoming Eastern European.
Great. Thank you very much, Edward. It's grand to have that insight that you've given us.
Okay.
And incredibly helpful to our panel, and we greatly appreciate what you brought to us. So thank you.
Okay.
Edward, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I sit and listen to the fishing?
Yes, Edward, you're very welcome to sit and listen. Okay, so with that, I'm hoping to welcome Paul Trebilcock into our meeting. Paul, are you there somewhere, please?
Yep, I think so. Hopefully you can hear me.
Okay, brilliant. So Paul, obviously you've got the gist of what's going on. And if we could just dive straight into your piece, please, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. And afternoon, everyone. And obviously, thanks for the opportunity to come and give evidence here. So my name is Paul Trebilcock. I work here at the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation. For those who don't know, that's a fishermen's organisation entirely funded by Run for Fishermen. In Cornwall, we've got around 175, 180 vessels in membership, primarily from around the Cornish coast. Big range of different types of boats, from inshore handliners with just one person on, through to beam trawlers operating out of Newlyn with 6 hands on, going for sea a week at a time. That diversity of membership and boats you see around Cornwall reflects the diversity of the fish and shellfish which the boats catch and land here. So one of the biggest ranges and most diverse range of species landed, certainly in the UK, but possibly across Europe, with regularly over 40 different species landed on Newlyn, regularly morning and all around the coast, anything up to 50 a day. As an organisation, we have sort of 3 or 4 key functions, one of which is quota management, so ensuring that our vessels have access to quota for the species which they require that for their landings. A marketing function where we look to promote and secure sustainability accreditations for some of our key fisheries. For example, Cornish MSC hake has been one of our recent success stories in the marketing side of things. And just a more general representational role for fishermen to get the Cornish fishermen's voice heard at regional, national and international level. And I guess something like this is an exemplar of that. So maybe starting sort of a high level skim and then maybe come back a little bit, but I think it's maybe lost on some people sort of the economic importance of fishing to Cornwall. Last year, our members landed in excess of £50 million worth of fish and shellfish first sale value. That was then sort of translated, if you look at the processing sector, so some of our bigger onshore parts of our industry, like of ocean fish and fowl fish, processing sector worth more than 100 million then a year in Cornwall alone. And then that kind of multiplier effect is probably, as you get to the dining tables of Rick Stein, just goes up and up. So not insignificant in terms of money and downstream employment. I think the Cornish seafood brand is probably, I think, one of the strongest in the UK. I mean, I think when people are asked about fish or shellfish and you use Cornwall in it, straight away ears prick up. So for us, really, really important. We think, and backed up by, I think, a council study, that fishing does still provide that backdrop, that heritage for one of Cornwall's other big industries in terms of tourism. I think it's something like 8 out of 10 tourists said, part of the reason they come is to see fishing boats in working harbours. So kind of important for that. We've I think was touched on slightly there this with Brexit coming up. I guess we are one of those sectors where we do see genuine potential benefits. So that may be in terms of fishing opportunities, so more fish and shellfish available, maybe in terms of access, and maybe in terms of better, more sustainable management of our fisheries. So definitely that optimism about what Brexit may be able to deliver. I think we've kind of in Cornwall have a track record of working on and delivering in terms of sustainability, whether that be with our MSC accreditations, whether that be with our collaboration with CFAS scientists, with NGOs, with DEFRA, with the MMO. So it's quite a strong base there of working to deliver on policy objectives. Our friend there in the farming talked about I guess youth and succession and where the next generation will come from, and absolutely, I think fishing has something in common there with farming, but we've certainly begun addressing that. We think we've this in the last 18 months established a youth board where fishermen who are coming in are all under 30, identifying barriers to them, not just coming in, but the idea of progression to owning and skippering boats. We are in the process of seeking approval for the first, I guess, first in the country fishing apprenticeship. That's with the Qualifications Authority now. So same as my friend from the farming said, we didn't really understand why people weren't coming, but it was a lot to do with this idea of the proposition, what was there for young people coming in, rather than it being a last resort industry. So that idea of building up, I guess, a bit of profile and image about a narrative about fishing being a profession of choice with genuine career pathways. And a genuine ability to make a positive contribution, not just to the industry itself, but to the wider Cornish community with everything that goes with that. So we kind of at that high level, I think it'd be fair to say that perhaps fishing is in a slightly more upbeat mood than perhaps we just heard there from farming, where we think that there's something there. We're used to sort of weathering sort of challenges, difficult times politically and economically and socially, but have a track record of adapting and innovating and trying to not just support our own industry, i.e. fishing, but support the local communities that depend on that. I think kind of examples which may or may not be of use, but one very close up one has been COVID. First time round, we got started straight away with our Fish to Your Door campaign, which came out sort of within 48 hours of the last one, where we were linking customers directly to merchants in Cornwall, which may seem strange for a fisherman's organisation to be helping merchants, but it's all part of that supply chain. With no merchant, with no market infrastructure, there's nothing for us to fish for. So, and we ended up last time round, we connected something like 6,000 or 7,000 new customers with merchants. To try and at least not plug the gap, because we wouldn't plug the food service and restaurant gap entirely by that, but at least keep the machinery turning, allowing boats to go to sea, allowing auctions to sell fish, allowing merchants to buy it and consumers to eat it at home. So we've seen that as something really positive. And of course, with this week, and the preceding 2 or 3 weeks, we're gearing up for another tough time in terms of market. But that route to market is one which we see as important. And obviously working with some of the bigger merchants on the retail and higher volume stuff to ensure that boats can still go to sea. Boats all around Cornwall, individually and collectively through us, have been involved in quite a few scientific studies and new technologies to make sure our fisheries are both environmentally sustainable as well as economically sustainable, because the two are really closely linked. And just recently we're about to go into a partnership with one of the bigger buyers in the county, looking at one of our lesser used species to see if we can actually bring forward something more attractive to the retail and other consumers. So what had previously been quite an export dependent species, bringing it to hopefully to a domestic market, given where we're at. So we're quite proud and quite excited about our place there on not being although a traditional and a historically important industry, and proud of that tradition, but also proud to be at the cutting edge, ahead of the curve in terms of innovation and trying to adapt and change, so that as an industry we do survive and thrive as we go forwards, rather than continually look back to some halcyon days that may or may not have ever existed. So we've definitely got an eye going forward. I think it's probably fair to say that we have in recent years felt a bit neglected by the council, almost, I don't know, ignored, but taken for granted perhaps. So haven't felt the love from the council in recent years, but that may have been a bit of a two-way thing, in that we were our sort of attention was in Brussels, where the common fisheries policy tended to have a bigger impact on us than domestic politics, but that's changing, and I think we've certainly the council and I know we've been involved more in discussion probably in the last 3 months than we have in the previous 30 years, I would suggest. So that is definitely a positive thing, and I think we certainly see a role, and I think we'll look, or hopefully we can look towards the council more to sort of choose to sort of support the fishing industry, and that might be and hopefully it's working alongside organisations like the CFPO, because we are a fisherman's organisation, so you don't get closer to the quay than us unless you're going to step on it. So that could be just identifying that or areas of work to support the kind of maybe some of the stuff I've said about the economic importance, the social importance, and identify areas where we need to go forward. I mean, we have some of our own ideas as well, obviously, but we definitely see fishing being a sort of an integral part of Cornwall heritage, Cornwall economy, Cornwall communities going forward. And I think that a better or a newly revamped relationship with the council may be just exactly what's required, because I think without that kind of support and relationship with Cornwall Council, I suspect that areas like Plymouth and places like that, they're already showing signs of or ambition of wanting to lead in terms of fish or the marine in the southwest. And I'm Cornish, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I don't think that's right or appropriate. I think it should be Cornwall Council with the Cornish fishing industry at the forefront, being the flag boats or the poster boys of fishing in the UK, and hopefully this is the start of that process. So I think, I've kind of given, following on from my friend there from farming, a bit of a sort of an overview of where I see fishing and some of the challenges, and perhaps maybe there's a bit more time in this session to maybe get a bit back the other way from the council about anything we need in terms of detail and or anything you want me to go into in a bit more detail.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. I must admit the fishing industry is something which I have no idea about, apart from I know it exists. Being up in Bude, I think we've got a few day boats, but I'm not even sure if any of those are commercially operating or even members of your group up here, to be quite honest. I've got just a couple of reflections for you, if that's okay. In your opening piece, you said that there was approximately 175 to 180 operating vessels in the armoury of the Cornish fishing fleet, and I just wondered if that was on an upward or downward trajectory. And also, you said, quite surprising for me, that you saw that the Brexit scenario could present opportunities for the industry, and you're quite bullish about it. And I was just keen for you to expand on that a little bit for me. And being as you're talking about opportunities, perhaps you might just talk about a few threats that you might see on the horizon at the same time.
Yeah, so the figure of 175 to 180 boats, that's in membership of the CFPO. The figure across the county actually is a bit higher than that. There's quite a number of the smaller inshore boats which aren't a member of any organisation, but that is a majority of the larger boats, and certainly representing a majority of the economically active fleet are in that number. The trend in recent years has been towards consolidation. So there has been a move at the top end of the fleet, so the bigger boats, to consolidation. Primarily it was around quota availability, but also in terms of efficiency of the fishing operation. That said, on the smaller side, we're seeing actually there might be fewer boats if you look on the register, but there's actually a growing trend in terms of number of active boats. So up until this year's been a slightly different year, but up until the beginning of this year with before COVID. So I think in general terms it's been a kind of positive, I think, a positive trend where actual numbers of boats may have reduced, and so that consolidation. But if you look at the tonnage and the value of the fish land and shellfish landed, that's been going up. So in general terms, I think that's quite a positive thing. And for the record, I think the Cornish fleet through that time has those sort of maintained a phenomenal diversity. Places like Grimsby and Lowestoft, they've suffered when they became too specific, and so one sector of the fleet dominated, and then when if any problems or challenges emerged there, the whole thing just collapsed. Whereas I think here in Newlyn, as an example, you've got big beam trawlers, big offshore netters, big trawlers, all contributing to the grossing. So therefore, the infrastructure cost, the ancillary services are there because of them, and that benefits the smaller boats, because with just the smaller boats you wouldn't have that. But the smaller boats have that provenance narrative story that makes Cornwall the go-to place for premium quality fish and shellfish. So that interaction is really important. You won't feed a nation from an allotment, nor will you feed it from the big factory boat. It's somewhere in between. So on that score, that's where we're at. In terms of opportunity, so Brexit, there are clearly we think opportunity, and let's start there first. So quotas. So if we use the example of something like haddock currently in this area, the UK share 10% of the quota, France 65, Ireland 20. The objective is to get that more aligned with resource available in our EEZ, which would equate to on independent scientific figures more like 50%. So, and there's a range of species where we could go through that. There's the whole access issue. So currently EU fleets have access right into our 6-mile limit. So we can have small boats out of Mevagissey, 30 feet long, 150 horsepower, at times fishing in competition and alongside 80 feet, 1,000 horsepower steel Frenchmen. So you can imagine that's a very real, tangible illustration of a bit of inequity and asymmetric in terms of fisheries management. So we think that the 0 to 12 should be exclusively for the UK fishing fleet. And then outside of that, it's about being an independent coastal state for fishing. So it would be the UK that drives the management, that does things in the right way, that can be more nimble in terms of fisheries management. So that's our sort of our zone of optimism and the prize. I mean, the obvious concern in it is market. There's no point in hiding away from that. We've got a strong export market, which we've enjoyed for several decades, but we've been doing quite a bit of work with both the bigger export merchants, but also the markets on the EU side. So understanding that market won't disappear, the route to market will get harder. There may be tariff, there may be non-tariff, and there may be illegal barriers to it in the first instance, but none of which we feel is insurmountable. We think that all the work we're doing on developing domestic demand and demand in other parts of the world. So if I use the example of crab, where the Chinese market was really growing and still is, it's actually coming back after COVID. So as an alternative to the EU market, which people talk about, that's really helped in terms of price and being able to get rid of volume in recent years. And so that's going that way. Then domestically, I maybe use the example of hake, where traditionally we relied on the Spanish export market. Put a lot of effort in securing MSC certification, worked with celebrity chefs and quite a lot of promotional work all round on that species, and switched it from a 80% export to 85% domestic market in the space of 10 years. And landings in Newlyn have gone in that same time from 200 tonne averaging somewhere around 150 10 years ago to 2,000 tonne last year, averaging just under £3. So I think it's not the answer for everything, but I think when sometimes that will be the challenge in the whole Brexit scenario, will be the market issue, and it will be about we won't replace all markets, it won't be overnight, but what we can and have done is we've worked on finding alternative markets. Where that isn't going to be possible, we'll be looking at alternative routes to market. So, and we've done quite substantial amounts on that. So, I don't think, I think we are. I think it's fair to say that the fishing industry is quite optimistic about the future and the opportunities that come. But I don't think it's completely dead or naive to the challenges that may come with that. And I guess to use a fishing expression, nobody's not expecting some stormy waters in the next few months.
I was waiting for that one to come.
I know, a bit cheesy. Sorry about that.
Councillor Jim McKenna, please.
Pete, thank you. Paul, good afternoon. Couple of questions inevitably, but I'll wait for you to refresh.
You go, Jim. You go.
Thank you. Just what's the sort of ballpark in terms of the number of jobs associated directly and indirectly with fishing? Because that, I think, would help the council understand the scale of the opportunity as well as some of the challenges.
Yeah, I guess part of that is actually is where I alluded to getting a good grip on where we currently are in terms of that. But in terms of ballpark, if we talk about in this organisation, 180 boats, and beyond that, it's probably another maybe 150, 200. I mean, we're getting towards 1,000+ jobs on the boats. Yeah. And then as you come ashore, you get varying multipliers that go from 5 jobs ashore, 8 jobs ashore. But I think you could narrow it down, maybe look at some of the big employers, just to give a bit of guide and ballpark. But foul fish, somewhere around 250, 300 employees. Ocean fish, 200 employees and expanding. So, you know, I think you're certainly getting up into thousands of jobs as opposed to hundreds.
Brilliant. I just wanted members to be aware that this isn't niche. This is a very significant part of the Cornish economy. And as Paul says, possibly the local authority could do a little bit more. Just you mentioned this is something that's a bit of a sort of a good thing. You mentioned you've got this new sort of board for under 30-year-old entrants. Are you seeing a few more younger people coming in as sort of training and stuff is improved?
Yeah, I guess the answer is yes, and that's why it's happened. I think what we got stuck in for a number of years was saying new people aren't coming in because, and we tried to second guess what that was. So 18 months ago, we went and spoke to some 16-year-olds, sort of pre-leaving school, but also some of our newer, at that sort of 20-year-old mark, people who were in the industry, and then a couple of people who bought their boats 25, 30. And what kind of emerged was that new entrants, it wasn't all about the image, it was about that we had nothing to offer those 16-year-olds, so there was no qualification. So that's where the apprenticeship came from, where the youth board kicked off from. Yeah. But once we understood that bit about how we're going to attract a generation, then there was the bit about once you've got them in, where do you go? And so we've seen now in places like, and Newlyn is often seen as the barometer, but sometimes I like to take things outside of Newlyn because it's not. Yeah. Cornwall and fishing isn't just Newlyn. So places like Mevagissey and Newquay, where there are young skippers who have come through in their 20s, and it's not. The thing about that is then it's progression. So there are barriers beyond just coming in, and that is around licenses, around access to quota, and actually in some cases around advice on how to do that. So I don't think we've got some good and good pockets of young people coming in, but I think they need support and encouragement. And when we talk about new entrants, I think we've already expanded that to new entrants and progression within the industry, because right. Without that, I think sell of a genuine career, it's hard for young people hard for young people. We should get some young people and ask them, because I'm not, but that comes across loud and clear. You know, guys look for a sort of not just a start, but they're looking for a can I go somewhere with it? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Peter, I've got two more things if I may. I'll try and deal with them really quickly. Paul, you've mentioned quota a number of times. The opportunities, I think, through the new arrangements of potentially acquiring some quota would appear to be there. As you know, the local authority is actively looking at the opportunities this might create, the possibility of doing some social stuff as well as some economic stuff in terms of return, but also ensuring, if it were to be approved, that quota would stay in Cornwall. So I guess if that were to be the case, presumably your organisation would be supportive, because we have the Dutchy Fish Quota Company and have had for 15 years or more. So what impact do you think that might have?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the quota issue can often be quite a sensitive and contentious one. I think any support the council could give would be, I think, useful. I think it's probably worth noting that in terms of existing quota and FQAs, the market has changed considerably, and where there was some availability, that's become increasingly difficult. But with Brexit, there is the idea of this. What we call a Brexit dividend, so additional quota as a result of Brexit, and I think government are currently consulting on how that might be allocated in the post-Brexit era. And I think we as an organisation have flagged that we're not. People may find this strange, but we're not supportive of individual ownership for this additional quota, but rather see it held at a community level. So whether that be us as a PO or as a broader Cornwall community, something like that. But that kind of then allows for sensible, for strategic management of that additional quota. So some of it could be used for progression to allow people to make the leap from a small boat to a big boat. Some of it can be made available for incentivising sustainable fishing activity, whatever the objectives are. There's people may have different views on that, but I think the key point for us was to get to ensure that government understand we want to first secure the maximum possible quota opportunities, and then rather than the existing FQA holders, quota holders or owners, corporates to get bigger, but to be able to use that for everybody's benefit, the collective, which does include them. You know, the big quota holders would also get benefit. So definitely presents an opportunity, and of course, you know, what's probably good to understand is that the quota species are around half, or maybe even a touch less, in terms of the landings for the fleet around Cornwall. So, you know, all of our shellfish is non-quota, cuttlefish, turbot. There's some important stocks for us. So, but yeah, definitely opportunity. Definitely looking for community benefits, or certainly multiple beneficiaries at the end of this.
Thank you. And just one footnote, Pete, since I started playing cricket for St Ives, I've eaten a lot more hake, and it's very good indeed. So I'm happy to promote that as much as I can. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Really interesting that you're describing a different way of owning quota. There's something which I've never thought of personally before, but I really like the idea of community land associations and community land trusts.
Yeah.
And you sort of think that maybe community ownership that's managed does enable things to be have that. I think we used the word several times already today, but that successional feel to it, that it can be passed between generations without being lost. So I think that's really important, and I quite like the way your thinking is going on that.
And I think, sorry, Chair, but I just think that what I probably do want to emphasise there is that needs to be in the context of supporting the diverse fleet that contribute to catching and landing fish. You know. Sometimes there's almost a romantic idea of just giving more fish to small boats will be more jobs and more landings. That doesn't actually tell the full picture. We need that diverse fleet I spoke about. So we do need, maybe not aesthetically pleasing, but some of these bigger beam trawlers to catch monk and megrim in deep water, because you won't be able to make up that inshore. So, But I think that this organisation, I think fishing in Cornwall generally has been far more of a community, retained that community feel of it than perhaps some other parts of the country where there's been a migration towards corporate ownership and the narrowing of objectives to straightforward money rather than money, jobs, communities, culture. So hopefully that's the direction of travel we're in.
Peter, just so you're aware, there is a paper on this coming to committee in 2 weeks' time, so hopefully you'll be there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cheers, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Mike McLennan, please.
Good afternoon, Paul.
Again,
an interesting presentation. Again, lack of knowledge on my part. Two or three things. You mentioned the haddock. The French get 60% of the quota, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, as a layman, that threw me, because I think you think to yourself, well, surely we get the highest percentage of haddock. So is that something you're hoping to be changed if Brexit gets the go-ahead? And on your version of Brexit, what happens if the Westminster compromise on the fishing deal to get Brexit through? How does that affect the future?
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of, I think some of the quote stuff does come as a surprise to some people when they delve into it a bit. In this part of the world, the southwest, the quota shares we ended up with on entry into the EU were probably lower than they should have been, because at the time it was a political desire of the UK to join. The North Sea had just been kicked out of Iceland, so those big distant water fleets had the political ear in terms of fishing. So we definitely have an aspiration, or more than that, a sort of demand of UK government to change from those old relative stability shares based on that flawed negotiation to what is called zonal attachment. So that's just that our share would reflect the fish and shellfish that swim and live and are caught and spawn in our waters. So like the example of haddock I used, it goes from currently 10% to more like 50% if it was zone attachment. Something like monkfish, where we've already got 20%, is probably less of an increase, but a substantially higher tonnage will make a significant difference. So we're quite clear that our demand is not one of greed, is not one that should be seen as an unreasonable request. We're saying the UK, as an independent coastal state, should have control over the fisheries resource within our EEZ, and quota share should reflect that. So yeah, I think people are surprised when they scratch it a bit, but we are definitely not in a we are not doing as well as we should be. The second question then about UK government trading away fishing, certainly been our fear from the very beginning that it could be used as a political pawn or chip in this negotiation. I think at the whole Brexit referendum, fisheries seemed to climb up the political agenda, certainly used as a poster boy for the Leave side, and on the referendum result, and it didn't really matter. We took a neutral position as an organisation, but our first conversation with fisheries minister and other MPs after the referendum result was that, having been used as a poster boy, we will now expect some political return in this and not to be traded away. Now, that was said with, at the time, more, I think, more hope than it was expectation. But as the process has gone on, the fishing has remained quite high, and whether it's the change of government or whatever, and they may still yet change us out. But all I can say is, last week we were speaking with David Frost and the lead DEFRA negotiator, and there was no sign of fishing being traded away. And we've obviously seen some headlines today, but have had a phone call from the team in negotiating saying nothing's been done, so don't believe what we read in the papers. We're alive to the fact we could be traded away. What would happen if we were traded away, I think, goes to the question. Well, I mean, I think we have been working hard pre-Brexit on developing our fleet in terms of the standard of vessel, the sustainability of our fisheries, and improving the market position and brand of our fish and shellfish, and that will continue. It's just that Brexit would present almost a shot of adrenaline, make sort of turbocharge that and really make it, I think, a world-leading place. Cornwall could be a world-leading, a global leader in fish and shellfish, both in terms of catching it sustainably, in terms of managing the marine environment, but also importantly for production of absolute premium, world-renowned, world standard quality fish and shellfish. So that's kind of what's at stake. We as fishermen, Cornish fishermen, will get there regardless of the Brexit outcome. It would just be nice to see our government do the right thing and get us over the line here.
Paul, just to understand,
yep.
Do you go into the French waters if there's such a thing? I mean, is it open at the moment then?
Yeah. So currently, there's no such thing as French waters, but basically currently we've got the EU water. So in the UK, we currently go 0 to 6 is just the UK.
Yeah.
Then 6 to 12, there is access for French, Belgium and Irish vessels. Then outside of the 12, it's EU common waters, right over to the French 12-mile limit, at which point there is no UK access.
Yeah.
So the real asymmetric part of the deal in terms of access is that the French have their 0 to 12 and we only have 0 to 6.
Right, got you. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you call that not quite equitable. I'm just going to pause for one moment. I can see Rob Parsons. Thank you for joining us, Rob. We're running probably between 5 and 10 minutes over time. Are you happy just to hold on, or are you good? Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So, Councillor Jane Pascoe, would you like to have a chat with Paul?
Hello. Yes. Good afternoon, Paul. Thank you for that. That's really interesting. And oh gosh, I know the importance of fish. We love it. And I just want to bring it back a little bit from the point of view of the home domestic market and how the interaction with the fishing and the towns and cooking and education about fish could be. Do you think we need to educate the housewife or the cook of the house then more about people are often afraid of fish and cooking it, and I find that really such a shame because it's so easy to cook, it's so tasty, It's so good for people, and you generally find it's not their choice on the menu each week, is it? So what can we do that will encourage them to eat more fish and shellfish? I mean, in the lockdown, and I think Councillor McKenna would be one of them, everybody was saying, oh, we've got a crab tonight, so-and-so's found a crab, or somebody's brought in crabs, and everybody was loving it. So there's a huge market out there for shellfish that needs to be more accessible. What would you think of that?
Couldn't agree more, and I think the COVID thing brought it to life quite well. But even stepping back a bit before that, one of the anecdotes that I like to tell in terms of how food fashions can be influenced was sort of as Rick Stein was emerging and becoming seen a bit more on TV. One of the first things he was cooking up was gurnard, at the time used as crab bait. Almost overnight, the crab fishermen around Cornwall couldn't afford their bait because of Rick Stein, because everybody wanted to try it on the dinner table. So, and then that's continued, and that's a brilliant thing. No matter what any crab fisherman tells you, it's a brilliant thing. But that kind of celebrity chefdom kind of comes in waves, where you get a bit of a food fashion and it ebbs away again. And I think the COVID response to us, and we started that Fish to Your Door initiative, and that was linking consumer with merchant locally. And right at the outset, we found massive support and desire for people to buy local fish and shellfish. That was brilliant. But that fear you talked about was coming through loud and clear as well. Or what do I have to take a whole fish? Do I have to take a crab? So what we kind of did there was just almost broaden it out and say, right, you can have that choice. But where we had sort of merchants, there were many good ones, but I'll use Celtic Fishing Game as one example. They were entirely dependent on food service, and that then changed to home domestic deliveries, and filleters and prep people straight away got what this was about. So when the person went and said, oh, how would you like it? Do you want us to fillet it? And offered some advice on that in the first instance. And we've been back round actually just in the last few weeks, and like I say, it seems like good timing. So a sort of follow-up survey, and a lot of people said that they started out by getting a fillet or some preparation done, but have felt braver since. So have gone for we'll have a whole lobster delivered rather than some lobster meat, or we'll have a whole fish rather than just a fillet now. And that I think is encouraging, and for me something that is precisely what we should be building on. I think in county to make this. I speak about it from the catching side, but almost a fish food capital of the UK or globally. So that whether we're running demonstration kitchens, whether it's online service for fillet and fish prep and cooking, through to some of the top end people making sure Cornish fish always fed. But I think as a country, I think we are slowly improving in that kind of recognition and appreciation of raw produce, but it will take time. But anything we can do to speed that up and encourage more people to do it, the better.
Yeah, I was thinking also with school education, because you generally find children go, oh, fish, but it's come down from the parents.
Yeah.
So therefore, I think perhaps something more there in education. I don't know, because it is a wonderful product for them. It's so good for them.
And I think maybe that's a bit about this. We've had school visits here and really interested in seeing where their food come from. It seems to me, and that you're right, is the initial get over that and then understand this crab turns into the crab sandwich. This mackerel turns into your mackerel bap. It's kind of that process, and I guess that's where if there's anything we can do with the council across schools or any procurement like that. There's the first bit, which is getting people aware and demystifying and de-fearing them, and then the next thing is making sure if you go into a Cornish school that there should be Cornish fish on the lunchtime menu. So just stuff like that. I mean, it kind of. I know I've spent a bit of time in Brittany, and it's kind of, I guess, where I get a bit of inspiration from is that there is that that regional pride in that industry. And I think this would run right into farming as well, where local produce, local schools, local hospitals, local just to keep that economy going.
That's right. No, thank you.
And it's good.
Brilliant, Paul. Paul, can we try now and squeeze your top 3 out of you for Cornwall Council?
I guess one is a general support, please. So where we have things like government consultations from the MMO about quota distribution, like economic link, then it would be good to get that clear and perhaps where possible line of sort of agreement rather than tripping over ourselves, which I'm not saying has happened, but it could happen the more we're into Westminster regulation rather than CFP. So that would be a general support and this kind of dialogue and relationship where we all know where we're coming from. That needs to be built on. I think the idea of recognising the social and economic importance of fishing. So maybe we do need to commission something a bit more up to date jointly about contribution, catch, sell, ancillary, tourism, consumer. So that economic, social through the whole supply chain, and perhaps any help on brand development. So that aspiration of making Cornish seafood I don't think it's too ambitious to talk about a global brand. I would like people to think their first choice for fish and shellfish should be Cornish, and that may well start with procurement at local level. But let's aim high and make it a global recognition. But those 3 areas for me, I think the nuts and bolts of catching fish and selling it, and Rob will be on a minute about tying up boats. That's for those in the industry, but that support role and promotion that council can provide I think that will be invaluable going forward.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it. It's been quite interesting to talk to you from my point of view, because I don't know hardly anything at all about fishing, and there's been lots of stuff that you're talking about, particularly in relationship to quotas and opportunities that I didn't suspect you'd be coming from that direction. So that's been really great. Thank you very much indeed.
Paul, thank you. That was great. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So 7 minutes late, we're going to come on to Rob Parsons, please. Rob, welcome. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for the invitation.
Good afternoon. Proper.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right, thank you very much, sir. Thanks for the invitation. I've listened to the whole thing, really. It's very interesting. I could say everything that Paul said, but we're coming at it from a slightly different angle. So I'm Rob Parsons. I've been Harbour Master here. I'm the Chief Executive at Newlyn since 2013. And obviously port infrastructure is quite interesting because you're privately owned for places like Hale. You'll have Penzance, which is obviously Cornwall Council, and you'll have trust ports such as Newlyn, Padstow, etc., and Foy. The interesting thing is, in my opinion, since I've been here, and I'm not from Cornwall, so I came at this with a very fresh set of eyes, is the lack of alignment in terms of strategy of all. They're excuse the pun, but very maritime, but a bit of an island. So one thing that the Commission, especially at Newlyn, we're quite new. We've been, I think Jim's been there since, same as me, 2013, is to have a fresh look at things and looking at the strategy, etc., and trying to tie in as best we can with our neighbours. Obviously, as an act of statute, trust ports have their own identifier. Now, Newlyn is here for the purposes of supporting the fishing industry. Not really touching on what Paul Trebilcock was saying, that's his bag, but obviously it affects us hugely in the way that we have to be managers of the port and how we progress. With that stated, when you're set up as an act of statute, you'll feel slightly limited because you can't diversify. Now, that's something that the Commission of today is very much keen to do, because our statute was originally 1906. Newlyn's first statute was 1888, so you can imagine things were quite old when I got here and quite archaic. But since I've been here, obviously we've taken pride in the fact that we are the largest fishing port in England, and that does change because you'll have different statistics that will say things like Brixham are bigger because they have more fish landed. But in terms of tonnage and size, Newlyn is by far, in my opinion, not being biased, but because the geographical location to the fishing grounds, it's essential. It's the perfect place. Obviously, people think of it from a land point of view, that you're right down the bottom, but in terms of connection to the sea, Newlyn, in my opinion, is the best. Since I've been here, I've focused on core business because I think I'm going to echo what Paul said, is that at times, as a trust port, probably by our own admission back in the day, we have felt slightly separate from Cornwall Council. But in the HRF 2010, we've had 2 Cornwall councillors appointed to our board, which is a great link, albeit sometimes, you know, they challenge very well. That's what they do. And I know one of them's here, so I'm having a bit of fun with him. But at the end of the day, it's that interaction between the two is essential to keep the communication between what the Commissioner's ambition is and also what Cornwall Council are doing, but also whether or not they would support what we're doing. Since I've been here, I've been very fortunate in the fact that we've had European maritime fisheries funding. And that sounds great, but I would say to all the people listening, really, that fishing industry is very much focused on just fishing funds. And that seems obvious, of course it is, but it's very limiting. An example, when European maritime fisheries funding stopped, there was another fund that came out that completely omitted the port infrastructure. So we've always struggled to maintain the infrastructure that we have. Now, even though we're set up by an act of statute, we are very much on our own. So one could argue that our ultimate masters are that of the Department for Transport, and unfortunately, things like the Port Good Governance Guide, safety management systems, etc., try to guide the commissioners to run the port as a commercial business. And obviously, the stakeholders will want a huge amount of interaction and control. So we've had to be quite strict in doing that. So since being here, I've managed to secure quite a lot of funds through the maritime fisheries, and we've upgraded the fish market so it's fully refrigerated, safety factors, CCTV, landing gear, all those things that the fishermen need. However, because the industry has suffered and had a bit of a hard time, and it's, you know, we've got obviously taking Brexit into consideration, we're all very keen to or positive for the opportunities that brings. It's been very hard for us to actually try to grow because of those limits in the funding. Like I say, the last funding round took away all port infrastructure. So we've always struggled a bit there. So the Commission really are focused on diversification. So looking at things like offshore floating wind, marine renewables. And I noticed Paul was discussing about the industry. Now that affects us, even though we're not training providers. The fact that the average age of a fisherman is between 45 and 50 years old, and I'm really pleased and I support the fact they've got their youth groups, etc. now. But what's worrying is that the succession of that is a huge risk to us, because the management of all port infrastructure is on risk. It's capturing those risks and mitigating them as best as we can. So with that in play, really, we are concerned because there's a huge amount of worry with regards to Brexit. What will actually happen? You know, will we get our waters back? With that, if you have the vessels coming inside the 12, will they be forced to land into a UK port? Hopefully that'll be the case, because there is a huge amount of, say, politics, but interaction between the 3 ports of Plymouth, Brixham and Newlyn. Now, we have approximately, and I'm not going to go into too much detail in the numbers, but approximately £25 million worth of total value of fish comes through Newlyn. But because the fact that our infrastructure is slightly tired, other ports that have had that, namely Brixham, people are finding they're getting better service provision up there because they have the facility to do so. And we haven't had any major investment here apart from the market in many years. I'm looking out my window now, looking down North Pier, and the actual buildings there were built between the First and Second World War. So those are storage facilities, etc., to try and encourage businesses back into Newlyn. So it's very hard to put it into context of making it sound positive, but I think the problem that port infrastructure has is having that large cash injection in order to get the facilities correct in order to provide the service to start to compete again. And the geographical location of Newlyn in particular, I know it's not a sales pitch about Newlyn, but my personal opinion as an outsider is that Newlyn could be the best. And I agree fully with what Paul said about being the global brand. You know, we focus heavily on that, and we're really trying to make sure that Newlyn becomes a centre of excellence. And I can't understand before my tenure why that was never grasped upon. So I fully support what Paul said, and a lot of things he said I've made notes of because I wanted to say, so he stole my thunder a little bit. So core business, we got things straight since I've been here. The commission have been very supportive, good bunch, and we managed to slowly turn things around and get a surplus, which is important. However, when you've had many years of not having that and the area around it all really focusing on people going to sea, it's feast and famine in terms of their livelihood, and a lot of them are self-employed, or all of them are self-employed, and that impacts onto their families. So we've been, as a commission, have been very guided, or at least sensitive to the fact that we have a social responsibility here, but we also find that we have to run a business. An example of that recently is the COVID side of things. Like, just to reiterate what Paul said, when we have 80% of our catch that comes through Newlyn be exported, and that wholesale market completely crash, that was colossal for us. That was a huge income, and Newlyn gets its income from the gross sale of fish. So if you come in with your boats, we will charge you 2.5% of the gross sale of your fish for coming into the harbour. We also get money from the fact that once it's sold on the market, we get an extra levy attached to that. So an example in March was the hake boat. At this time of year, you could be talking on average £4 to £5 per kilo. I think it went down to 60 to 80p a kilo. So you can imagine that the income was completely decimated. And in terms of retail, that saved us a bit. Wholesale completely crashed, and retail's picked up. So Paul's right, that did change that, and hopefully that would change the culture. However, the export markets and the routes are still essential to us, and obviously there's a huge concern over Brexit. Health certificates are signing off those in order to make sure that export route remains open and is fluid enough. So from a port infrastructure point of view, there's a huge overlap with what we do and what Paul does at the CFPO. Like I say, recent funds have left port infrastructure out, and it's very hard to try and compete with some of the other ports that have had that investment. And the reason why it's not small fry in terms of what we lose. So if we have 25 to 30 million pounds of fish come through here a year, we could lose 10 million value of that or go up to another port. So you'll come in with your boat and you'll pay your 2.5% to Newlyn, but you'll also put it in a truck and you'll take it somewhere else. So the requirement and the need to build something here has never been greater in terms of the whole spectrum of the industry, whole spectrum of the socio-economic side of Newlyn and West Penwith area, because it's generally focused on this port. I think Paul also was raising the fact about ports being economic drivers. One thing I picked up when I first started here, coming from the Royal Navy, I didn't really know a lot about the industry apart from boarding them and really annoying them, was that every fisherman at sea will employ 5 to 8 people ashore. So the economic drivers and the investment needed there, it is a no-brainer. So going on to common fisheries policy and the reduction in the UK fleet. So that's another thing that we still don't know what's going to happen. You know, we are waiting with bated breath. I fully support what Paul's saying in terms of the fact that we've always been overlooked, because they'll argue, and I've been in many a meeting up at the British Ports Association in London, where Newlyn was elected a couple of years ago, was that, you know, only representing 4% of the GDP would mean really that the lawnmower business is bigger than you. Well, we all know politically that that's not correct in terms of what's needed. It's a food source, and nothing was more important and prevalent during the COVID and the landing and the continual landing of fish. So the need for investment is huge here. So really, who knows what the answer is to that? We all wait with bated breath. In terms of diversification, we are looking at other things because we have to survive. But we have to survive in order to grow, in order to create more jobs. An example of, if you can get more vessels to land their fish to you, then there is obviously firstly the landing dues which are there, but also the requirement for engineering goes up exponentially, because a lot of vessels here will go elsewhere. They'll go to Lloyd's in Holland or Scotland or wherever. So the actual revenue and the skill base is declining here because there's no real need for it, because there's no infrastructure here to support the businesses on the quay side. So we lose a huge amount of money through the gaps or out of the duchy because we simply don't have that facility. And I was in a meeting not so long ago with a member from Cornwall Council saying to me about marine engineering and youth in Cornwall, is the fact that out of 50 students, only one of them could actually get an apprenticeship with marine engineering. So it's all interlinked, is what I'm trying to say. I support what Paul said in terms of the shellfish sector and things like that, and the way we can look at that. Again, we're still a bit sketchy with the lockdown of recent, and the new one that's coming is going to hurt. Obviously, with the shellfish side of things in Portugal, lockdowns in France and Spain, it's going to have a huge impact on us. But for you, how we look forward, I think really it's basically just about investing in the infrastructure and making sure we can actually get the facilities here to actually grow in order to create jobs and bring more boats to it. It's that movie, Build It and They Will Come. In terms of what we have here, I don't want to undersell this, but it's also really the Commission's need and want to be aligned with Cornwall Council. And I think you'll find any port, whether it's trust, municipal or council-led, will want to be aligned, especially with the Maritime Strategy 2050 and the way we can all tie into that, because the only way we will succeed is by working together. So one thing I've been focused on here is making sure that I've been on the same page as Andy Brigden. I know he's recently retired and Chris has taken over. So it's really working with, but making sure we're not pulling at polar opposites. So any infrastructure upgrade shouldn't create any displacement. It should be to complement each other in order to grow. And that's something which we're quite keen to make sure doesn't happen. Really, I think that's probably enough from me. Thing I probably would like to say to end, Brexit, as we know, is an unknown, but we have had a huge push to try and get into innovation. We've got a couple of guys here that are looking fishy filaments. You may have heard it's the recycling of the monofilament nets, which gets used for gill netters. And also we found a company now that starts to recycle trawl nets. So sustainability, recycling is something we're looking into. But really it's a case of pushing forward for innovation. If you can ask me what 3 things I would say I'd ask for, I would say it'd be investment and infrastructure. That's vitally important. And also I think the ownership of the quota, like Paul and both Jim were discussing then, about it being authority owned, really, it keeps it fair. I think single people, private enterprises that own that create a huge concern because they have the control. And I'm not going to mention any names, but if you have a large company that owns a huge amount of quota, the influence they have on how things work in individual ports is huge, and it's not really fair, and that impacts on people's lives. The second thing is recruitment and succession. I think training is what's really where it needs to be. Fully support the apprenticeship scheme. It's really putting it on the map. You know, we're looking to help where we can to make this industry a career path for the cradle to the grave, really. It's not just something you fall into. So really it's about getting that investment into a training need. We've recently tried to get funding for a training hub, which would have been put us on the map, really, rather than just dealing with small courses. It would have been getting people to do their class 1, their class 2 tickets, which is based on varying sizes of vessel. It would have been firefighting, it would have been innovation, it would have been marine engineering. And unfortunately, I think, and I don't want to say too much, but I feel sometimes that fishing isn't understood, the industry isn't understood, and it is a little bit of, we just do our own thing and you'll get fisheries funding. That doesn't do enough. I think from port infrastructure point of view, it's about getting a large capital investment into these places in order to let them realise their aspirations, because that will drive growth. You're on mute there, Peter.
Peter, you're on mute.
Another schoolboy error. And I was going to say, I wanted to come to Jane Pascoe first, please, because Jane, you've trailed on the last 2.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Oh gosh, there's so much to take in there. I found that very, very interesting. Thank you. I was just going to pick up on the training, and I understand the investment, and if you've got the investment and on the infrastructure, and you can expand, and you need then to have the training and apprenticeships. I did a project some time ago up in southeast Cornwall. I was mayor of a town, and with the local school, and I was getting from the educational establishments that they didn't have the connectivity with the industry. The industry in particular, which I connected to them to finally, was the engineering. So you're talking about marine engineering. Would you say the same? Do we need to help somehow facilitate that connection between the fishing industry and the education authority, so that the young people are aware of these apprenticeships, they're aware that they can do them, they're aware of where to go? Do you think it's lacking in that way? Because I mean, that sounds like it could be important about bringing next generations on. And as you say, it's so important, the food supply and sustainability with the fishing industry. If we come out of Brexit, and we're not getting supplies from it all needs to be worked, doesn't it?
I think that's very wise. I think that it doesn't hurt. I don't think the connectivity is as good as it could be, because engineering, they'll just put it down to, it's just that, isn't it? But in terms of marine engineering and the requirement that holds is huge. So I think the connectivity and any assistance with that would be huge. We have a company here called Seafood Cornwall Training who do a grand job, but they need help to grow, because obviously they're limited with space, but we have the space. And an example I'll give is the Freeport consultation, which you probably heard about, which we're actively assisting with. The consultation's finished, but HM Treasury are looking to put out a prospectus. And one thing that they've said that they need or would like to see is a port that has the actual physical space to grow, of which we do. So in terms of your question, Jane, I think absolutely, yeah, connectivity is required in order to assist them. And then with that, more people coming, and we have the area to grow, to build them something which would be groundbreaking.
And the other question I was going to ask, if I may, Peter, to Rob, was the other side of the what goes on at sea is the leisure craft, the yachts coming into marinas. Do you need more investment there to be able to cater for more of those, or are they really a bit of a nuisance for the fishing industry, and we get in? I'm one of those that we get in the way. I know it's not the it's not the largest marina around, but would that help support the port for further investment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm a yachty as well, so don't beat yourself up. I think yachting is a leisure craft is essential, and I think tying into Penzance, because Chris isn't here, but I would say that leisure over over the Penzance side and the commercial over Newlyn would be an absolute win in terms of the actual economic drive or how that would work. I mean, I could fill this port 5-6 times over with yachts. Yeah. However, the statute really precludes that. We would love to have them, and we have the space to put more pontoons in, so we could coexist with them. And I think from diversifying, the Commission would be quite happy to do so, but it's simply lacking the funds to do it. But no, there would be no problem with that. And I think both Penzance and Newlyn could cope with a huge amount of leisure craft, because Mounts Bay is the most beautiful, isn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, that's right. We can't get into Penzance, but Newlyn's a jumping off point for going across the Isles of Scilly. Yeah. And I know I meet other yachties, French and Dutch, who'd want to do the same, who are coming over here. And it's very difficult to get into some of them. So yeah, I just wondered if that would help the tourism as well.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Note to Lynn that Mike McLenning has just indicated that he's leaving us. Are we okay to carry on? I think you said 3 at the beginning of the meeting was core for the purposes of this group.
Yeah, 3 is fine.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Jim McKenna, would you like to have a chat with Rob?
No,
I
he doesn't.
had several chats with Rob already today as it goes.
Yeah. How are you again?
For those that don't know, I am a Newlyn Harbour Commissioner. I was one of the 2 councillors he was in inverted commas not bigging up earlier, so all good. I just want to pick Rob on particularly the issue of sort of alignment with Cornwall Council, because it is interesting, because I represent Penzance, but part of my division is Newlyn as well, or part of Newlyn. It is interesting that Penzance Harbour, through the new sort of Cornwall Harbour Master, is waking up, so to speak. And I do think it is important. It'd be a lost opportunity if, I mean, clearly you're not going to always work in partnership because different ownerships, but I do think it would help if there was a little bit more collaboration between the council and Newlyn, so that both could prosper. So I just wondered if you wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, I think like with Andy Brigden, that was something that we highlighted, and Chris and I now we try and catch up a minimum once a month, because it's very easy to be too busy and then all of a sudden things dry up. So he's got a bid with the local towns fund, and we're sharing ideas to make sure that we don't displace from each other. And that's important, because even though there's open port duty, one thing that Andy and I always agreed not to do was displace. Now, if you're going to start putting landing davits for fishing in Penzance, then all of a sudden it creates a bit of bad feeling, because obviously that's our staple. But then conversely, we don't want to pitch for the old silly steamship. They should coexist, and Chris and I are definitely on the same page. So I actively encourage that, and I think that'll certainly happen now.
Great, thank you. My second question really was around similar to what I asked Paul, really, your thoughts in relation to the possibility of Cornwall Council becoming involved in sort of quota acquisition and management, working with the fishing industry.
Fully support that. I think that's something that would be a lot better than it is, because it would preclude the large players taking control. You especially, Jim, will be aware of the fact that large independent companies that own huge amounts of quota, far more than they should, have far too much influence. So I think Cornwall Council, perhaps in conjunction with Duchy Quota or CFPO, collaboratively would actually stop that from happening. And then there's enough fish, in my opinion, to support all 3 markets, Plymouth, Brixham and Newlyn here. So I think I would fully encourage that, fully support that.
Okay, and for the avoidance of doubt, that would be Pan Cornwall, where the demand was there. It's not just a Newlyn thing, if it happened, because there are obviously other ports and other
Fantastic.
boats.
No, fully support it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks, Joe. I mean, it just strikes me as I don't know enough about quota and what quota is, and how it seems to be traded as a thing of value. And to be acquired by people who I don't want to say misuse it, but perhaps to use it unfairly to support themselves somehow. I think that's something that I could do with a bit more education on, if I'm honest.
David is about to give you that, I think, Pete. But
Rob, well, I've got a question for you, Rob. Actually, part of your piece, you were talking about the opportunities that Newlyn presented for expansion, and you were talking about buildings and facilities and investment coming into the infrastructure of what Newlyn itself is. Is this something that could be deemed to be investable? Could it show a return? Because I'm thinking that Cornwall Council does actually have a significant pot of money for an investment programme, and if it could demonstrate return, there's no reason why fairly significant amounts of money couldn't be found to be talked about quite readily.
Yeah, I think I'm coming from this probably the same way Paul did, is that, we want to look at this glass half full. And I think with regards to, if you imagine if we get more of the 12-mile back or our waters back, then basically we don't have the hulls to catch the fish if we had an increase in quota. So we'd still want those non-UK registered vessels to come into Newlyn. By doing so, at the moment they don't have to, because you have these vessels called flag of convenience. So they are UK registered vessels, so it's slightly different, but you could have a company that's registered in the UK but is owned purely by a Spanish consortium, obviously in Spain, and they only have to land once between April and October, and then again once more between October and April, and that's not enough. We'll probably make from that possibly about £3,000. Whereas by putting in, and answer your question, you know, would you get a return? If those vessels that are non-UK have to land in a UK port, then the landings will increase. And with those landings increased, the engineering requirement will be there, the support requirement will be, the footfall would increase. So I think in terms of return, I'm no economist, I won't want to give you a bum steer, but for me, being a simple mariner, I say it's a no-brainer.
That's really interesting, and I guess we're not going to prove that point until the trade negotiations with Brexit are completed. David Rodder, please, you've indicated.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Broy. Just to pick up on that point, there will be an informal briefing on quota to the Overview and Scrutiny panel at the next meeting. So your wish will be delivered in terms of finding out more information on quota and the current system, and what we know about the future system. I'm loath to claim to be an expert on it, particularly with Paul and Rob on the call, but we will take people through. So hopefully you'll have a little bit better understanding of the current and future regimes. As far as the future regime is concerned, in Cornwall Council's response to the Fisheries Bill, we did state in there that our preference would be any additional quota that is issued by government or created by government is devolved to local areas, to local authorities to manage, rather than sold off to the highest bidder. And within, you'll see in the informal briefing that we're bringing in a couple of weeks' time, we're also investigating the potential economic opportunity to invest in quota to secure it. You know, one of the options that government are putting out is some form of auction for this extra quota. That auction won't just be on price; it could be on sustainability grounds and bringing in new entrants or restructuring. So we're yet to see what that would be. But one of the things that we're trying to ascertain is whether, or prepare ourselves for, is so that Cornwall Council can participate in that quota, in that auction, sorry. So as I say, there'll be a briefing at your next Overview and Scrutiny.
Okay, thank you, David. Right, so Rob, did we squeezed your top three out of you, didn't we? In fact, you gave them up without too much prompting, and I think I've got down investment and infrastructure, ownership of quota to be in not necessarily in private hands, but in sort of community ownership, recruitment and training. But was there a fourth one that I missed?
I think I was just probably getting carried away, Chair, to be honest, you know. But I think really those would be my main three. But I think if I was to finish now, just to answer the question to the council with regards to being investable, is that, you know, Paul touched upon processing and the revenue that brings, and we are looking to have everything on quayside, so that wouldn't just be engineering. I think I've spoken about that far too much in a way, but it's essential, but also it's the processing side. So we're actually looking at plans to widen one of the piers that we already have in order to put processing facilities right next to the new market. And that's quite cost effective, really. Obviously, the money goes under the floorboards a bit, but then on top, it's not so bad. But how that would actually increase employment, I believe, would be exponential.
Okay, thank you. So Rob, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Chair.
It's been educational for me as a landlubber.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Very, very interesting to listen to you, and of course Paul before you as well. So thank you very much indeed. It's highly valued.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. See you Wednesday, Jim. Bye bye.
Yes, you will. Cheers. All
right. Okay. So panel, we have Scott Mann at 3:45, I believe, which gives us a 5-minute comfort break, or
Pete,
time to go and put the kettle on.
Pete, can I just check what time we're aiming to finish? Because I'm conscious there's only 3 of us now, and we need 3 to quorum it. I'm desperate to stay on to ensure we finish. But I forget the programme. Scott is on next, and then do we have anybody after that?
No. So it's Scott for 40. We've got a 45-minute slot for Scott, and then we've got our close up.
A wrap up. Great, thank you. I was
so
going to say,
I'm
away by 5.
That'd be 5.
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect for me. Thank you, Peter. I get my foot seen to.
Okay. Right, so Lynn, we're going to come back at 3:45. Yes, is that okay? 6-minute break.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, just to put all your microphones on mute, if you could, please.
Lovely. Thank you
Did
very
you
much.
get my message, Lynn?
I did get your message.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Bye.
Hi, Scott.
Afternoon, Scott.
Hello, how are you all?
Fine, thanks.
All good, thank you.
Good, that's good to hear.
All right, so Scott, we just called a quick tea break, so I won't start for 2 minutes more. But thanks ever so much for coming.
Absolutely no problem. No problem.
Good. Are you in the smoke or are you in Cornwall?
No, I'm here, just trying to weigh up all of the kind of data analysis that we're getting from the scientists at the moment and work out what we're going to do this week. It's well, you know, the challenges around health and the potential job losses that might be coming down the road. It's an unenviable choice, really, what we're doing at the moment. It's so difficult.
No. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. There's no winner anywhere. But,
Any chance of keeping gyms open, Scott?
Yeah, I'm working on a few things at the moment. Golf is one of them, actually. We're getting a lot of correspondence on golf courses right now. And I think, one of the lessons we've learned from the first lockdown around mental health is to try and keep some of these sporting activities open if they can be done. So.
Oh. Please don't. My husband's supposed to be decorating the next month. If you open those golf courses, I won't see him for dust.
We think
to do it, Scott.
the challenges with gyms and with swimming pools is the transmission rates inside.
Right, okay, before we go too much further, I've got to say, Lynn's asked me to remind you that the meeting is being recorded, even though we did stop for just a 2-minute break. So we'll have to stick to the agenda. Nice as it is to chat to you, Scott, and I'm sure.
No worries.
Sure, there'll be other opportunities. So, Scott, welcome to our meeting. Thank you very much indeed for attending. This is an inquiry on the economic vitality of coastal areas in Cornwall, coastal and rural areas in Cornwall. So, thank you for coming. I'm extremely aware that you are leading an inquiry at Parliament on this subject as well. So what we're doing is we're having a series of expert witnesses come forward to give evidence on their particular sphere of interest. And we've asked each one to give us sort of 10 to 12 minutes, just an introduction on what they're doing. And then each of our panel members will have a chat with them. There's only 3 of us today, Scott, so you'll be let off fairly likely. And then to finish up, we'll wrap it up with asking you for top 3 recommendations as to what you think Cornwall Council could do to help rural and coastal areas in Cornwall. Okay. So, Scott, the floor is yours.
Fantastic, thank you. So, recently led a debate on the rural productivity gap in Parliament, and a lot of the things that I'll be talking about today relate to the debate that was held. And the first thing that I'd like to say is that some people in the media would like to suggest that this levelling up agenda is a north versus south thing. And I think it's important, first of all, to recognise that rural poverty exists and is as challenging to deal with as some northern urban poverty. And there are a number of contributing factors that lead me to believe that levelling up across the UK is absolutely the right thing to do. So that's kind of the lead in, really. I think from my point of view, I grew up in North Cornwall, and I saw many of my friends and colleagues that I grew up with having to leave Cornwall because they couldn't get access to good quality employment. Sometimes they didn't have the qualifications that were required to be able to access employment away. So I think that ultimately I think this is a huge issue, and it's multifaceted. But there's a number of things that I raised in the debate where I think we can kind of make a really big impact for rural and coastal communities in Cornwall. So the first one that I recognised was the disparity with further education. So previously we've been under this proposal to get 50% of people to university. The ability for our further education system to pick up degree level apprenticeships and skills-based learning it is something that I very much support. And in fact, I'm working very closely with Callywith College at this moment in time, try and roll out some degree level apprenticeships and vocational level apprenticeships in Cornwall. I think that might help both in terms of our retention of nurses and NHS staff, but also in terms of a private business knowledge base and skill base. So I think that's one facet is the gap in skills-based learning, and that's one area that I'm determined to close through all of our colleges, but predominantly ones that are offering this new vocational and degree level tier. On economic output, the point I made in the debate was that people that work in Cornwall work really hard. Many of them have 2 or 3 jobs to be able to deliver a household income, and that they have to do that to get by. You know, we've got high house prices, water bills that are higher. We have people that live in fuel poverty. So the earnings gap that exists between Cornwall and other places around the country needs to shrink. And I guess the next question you might want to ask me is, well, how do we do that? So first of all, we train people up. Second of all, we look to see how we can get those investment or how we can get some of those businesses that are currently working in the cities into places like Cornwall. Now, COVID-19 has had very little upside, but one area where I have noticed a degree of movement is with businesses wanting to relocate and people wanting to relocate out to the cities. So one area where I think Cornwall Council might be able to try and help is to try and encourage some of that movement, not just into places like Truro, but into some of these coastal communities like Peter's up in Bude and others who haven't seen that transition of business previously. On housing, I think, you know, of course, the new first homes are going to help with 30% discount for key workers. I think that will help people in Cornwall. But I also think we need to do much more for community self-build, so that people have a home that they own and a place where they can effectively work from. I don't think we've done enough on shared living with live-work units. I think we should attempt to try and change policy to allow people to live and work in the same building. I think that would be particularly helpful. One of my particular areas of interest at the moment, you might have noticed the sign here, but I'm the parliamentary bass champion, and I'm leading an inquiry at the moment into the possibility of catching bluefin tuna off the southwest. Now, many of our fishing communities have struggled in the past, and with the repatriation of the common fisheries policy to the UK, there's a real opportunity for us to get some tuna quota and for us to have that as a recreational species. So I think economically that could be quite big for us. You know, that there's a lot of people that go that like to target big fish, and they pay an awful lot of money to go around the world to be able to do that. So I think in terms of our coastal community aspirations, I think that's one area where we should look. I think we need to maintain our blue flag beaches. Tourism is obviously hugely important to us. So, you know, things like water management plans in the Environment Bill and ensuring that our blue flag beaches are maintained it is absolutely in terms of our inbound tourism, but also our potential outbound tourism post-COVID. I mean, pause for breath a minute and see where else we can go with this. So in terms of it, I'd like to touch a little bit on agriculture. We've seen increases in productivity in agriculture over a period of time. We're obviously moving to less people working on the farms and more robotics. So I think utilising some of the Shared Prosperity Fund to help rural communities economically could be funneled through the Shared Prosperity Fund. I think that needs to be utilised to its best potential. Outside of the constraints that exist with the previous fund, it would be nice if we had some direction about how we could spend that money and what we could spend it on. So we set the priorities for that. I think there's a real opportunity for in the environmental land management scheme, the replacement for basic farm payment, for us to be able to connect up some of these coastal and rural communities with cycleways. That's one of the areas that I'm specifically looking at the moment. I've had meetings over at number 10 with the transport spads over there to see how we can make that work the idea that you can link up the Camel Trail and the Tarka Trail through coastal communities in North Cornwall, I think economically would be huge. It would also give people the ability to cycle from one town to another, so it might improve their life chances as well with being able to access better quality employment in a different town. So I definitely think that that's something we should look at. I think we're ahead of the curve on buses. So the one public transport system that was rolled out in Cornwall has been beneficial to many, many people. I think there are many rural communities that are already looking at what we did in Cornwall with that money and seeing whether they can replicate that around the country. So I think connectivity is hugely important. And we all know that in the past, getting around Cornwall, even from one town to another, wasn't always easy on public transport. But we are starting to see quite big improvements in that regard. Should we leave it there a minute, Peter? Maybe, did you want me to give you some recommendations for the council?
Well, yeah, Scott, at the end of what we're doing is we're sort of putting a nice tight grip on our witnesses and asking them to make 2 or 3 or possibly even 4 recommendations of interventions that the council could possibly do. And obviously you've given us a nice long list. I think I'm up to number 10 on your list. I mean, there's several things that I'd like to talk to you about, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my panel, there's only 2 members of them here remaining, but Jane, would you like to come first and have a chat with Scott?
Oh, gosh, we are short in numbers. I'm sorry, Scott. Yes. Well, first of all, let me go on to agriculture, which is one of my little hobby horses. I do champion for the farmers around here because we South East Cornwall is in a difficult situation, and with Lisgard we've lost our market, and part of this inquiry is how important the hinterlands are to the impact and the interaction between the towns. So one thing I'd say about worst thing about having a market is actually losing it because of the effect it has. And I've got farmers who keep coming along and having, you can't call them pop-up sheep sales, but they're seasonal sheep sales. I mean, we get over 1,000 head of sheep at these sheep sales because they need somewhere to go to market them that's not miles away, and at the moment it's looking like everything's going to be centralised up well, not centralised, all going to be placed up on the Devon border, and that's not always easy for the farmers to be away from their farms every day for a whole day, and not every day, for a whole day, and to get them there, and food miles and transport, all that goes with it. But one thing you just did bring up was about the cycle trail, and I just want some acknowledgement of how important the industry, the food and farming industry is, and the livestock, because I've had 6 farmers on the phone today and a further 4 over the weekend because a cycle trail, well, actually it's an environmental assessment, has gone public. And they find that this cycle trail is being put through their stockyard, past their slurry pits and all those sort of things. So I really want acknowledgement that it's wonderful to have these cycle trails, but this isn't a back garden to be used on a Sunday when they want to get their bike out. This is actually people's livelihoods. And so I air caution, although we all agree with cycling, we all think it's, we want to get people off the roads, we want to reduce the carbon footprint. I think, we need to be a bit careful that we're not actually hindering what we need these farmers to be doing, and the safety of not going through fields with livestock, etc. So I just wondered, just briefly, if I'm sure Peter will allow me to come back with other things, but let's start on that and see where we're going. Okay.
Yep. Okay. So from my point of view, I agree. I think the countryside is a living, breathing workplace, and I genuinely believe that farming in the southwest is on an upward curve. We are seeing, particularly in dairy, we're seeing a quite a substantial increase in the supply side, because we are, we've got one of the best cheeses in the country being produced in Cornwall. We've got a lot of producers that are after dairy supply. But I fully accept your point. I think, you know, as we move away from land-based payments to one for public good, there is going to be certainly some conflict between what that public good looks like and what we would like farmers to do, and also them being able to run a successful farm in the same way that they always have. So yeah, I fully accept that that point.
Yeah, there's been a lack of consultation and communication with them on this point, and I actually felt they should have been the first ones to have been consulted. You know, and going back onto the market thing, what I was trying to say is that the action between the hinterland here in southeast Cornwall and the market towns is they are the reason, the farming community are the reason we've got 4 banks still in this guard, 3 High Street, 1 the professionals, as in solicitors, architects, accountants, is all because of the agricultural sector. You take away that indigenous industry from that hinterland, which is probably what's happening a little bit in southeast Cornwall, or displacing it, and all of those professional services will be lost in a town, which has a huge economic impact to the small market towns. And I'm not just talking about this guard, really. Callington probably it's happened to them, and many others in Cornwall. So that was my point there, really.
One area where I would like the council to take action on that specifically is around the devolution of licensing powers. So I think you have a real opportunity in Cornwall to be able to set the agenda. We've seen what people have been capable of with COVID, with local supply chains, and I think there's a really interesting piece of work that can be done by the council around, you know, around licensing and around the supply of food direct from marketplaces, which I think might be quite helpful in terms of supporting local businesses and growing local supply chains.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Thank you, Scott. Jim, your turn.
Peter, thank you. Scott, good afternoon again, and thank you. That was really interesting. Actually, I've got 3 areas I just wanted to ask about. First is, and I've asked everybody this afternoon, is around fishing quota and the potential opportunities arising from Brexit. I'm encouraging Cornwall Council to look at this actively in terms of investment, working with the fishing industry around Cornwall. And I just wondered what your thoughts might be to potentially have some into community ownership. So Cornwall Council working with CFPO, working with others to ensure that, rather as you've talked about in terms of training, that there are younger entrants supported into the markets, because at the moment the average age is similar to farming. I think it's probably somewhere over 50. So just welcome your thoughts on that from a social as well as investment perspective. Really encouraged to hear what you said about bluefin tuna, because as you'll know, there have been more and more sightings, and that level of sort of interest and the sort of money that people have who are sort of interested in that sort of fishing could make a significant difference to a number of places, I think. And then I just wanted to ask you one just about shared prosperity. You mentioned sort of getting it out to rural areas particularly, which I think is a great idea, not being from Truro, Camborne, Poole, Redruth or Falmouth. So it's really just how could the council support you and I guess some of the other sort of MPs in Cornwall in actually making that case when the time comes?
Yeah, sure. So deal with the middle one first, or on the bluefin stuff. Just to be very clear, we're advocating for catch and release. This isn't mortality on bluefin. It's a scientific project around catch and release, and we're trying to get some quota from ICAT at the moment, the International Tuna Organisation. On your point, so first of all, I want to commend the council and over the past 20 years for encouraging, not in fishing, but in agriculture around county farms. And I think that the similarity between what you're suggesting, Jim, in county farms and having a kind of quota where you could bring new entrants into the marketplace would be a really interesting space for Cornwall Council to be in. I wouldn't have any problem with that at all. I think like you said, the average age of fishermen is generally increasing, and it would be an opportunity for us to bring new entrants into the market. So I'm very supportive of that. But I wish we were moving faster on shared prosperity. It's a huge frustration for me that we haven't got more information on that. And obviously the government are dealing with a number of things at the moment. But I think ultimately that in terms of Cornwall's economic development and growth, having the ability to move quicker and faster, and allowing more smaller businesses to be able to get access to some of that shared prosperity money will really make the difference in some of these small villages and market towns.
Brilliant, thank you. Are we realistically, Scott, are we looking at 2022 at the earliest in terms of when shared prosperity comes in, or is that not yet established?
It's not established yet. We're calling for it all the time, but my understanding is that that there's supposed to be sort of a white paper coming on what it's going to look like, but it's been delayed. Obviously, with the implications around COVID, it's on the back burner at the moment, but it is vital that we get that information out as quickly as possible so we know what it's going to look like.
Great, and I think you'd have support from this panel in terms of getting that money out to rural areas and villages as well as the usual towns. So good, thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Scott. I see David Rodder has signalled. David.
Yes, thank you, Councillor LeBroy. Hi, Scott. Good to see you.
Hi, David.
Just a couple of points of clarity for the panel. Really pleased, Scott, to hear that you're involved in the bluefin tuna thing. Just to let you know, I am in touch with Cornwall residents on the stakeholder panel for that, and have been for a while to see what we can do to help. And I've also been contacted by the relevant team in DEFRA just to see how we can explore that further. So once I've had that meeting, perhaps I'll send you an update just so that you know what's happening at our end. On the Shared Prosperity Fund, you'll have seen Cornwall's submission to that, Cornwall and the Isles Scilly submission and ideas on that, and we're consistently putting that into government at every single opportunity we can. So anything you can do to help us with that, to land that, is really, really welcome. And just the other thing to say for clarity, just again, in case anyone's going to view this, the DEFRA have reopened the Countryside Productivity Scheme, which is using what's left over in the current Rural Development Programme. So farmers are able to access small-scale grants for on-farm productivity related activity now. It's a fairly simple, straightforward application process. So if any farmer in your constituency is talking to you about those types of investments, there is a scheme open that they can access as we speak. So that's it, Councillor. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Right, brilliant. Is it my turn now? Right, okay, so Scott, I made a series of notes as you were chatting away, because so many of the things that you're talking about are things that have been on my mind for the last three and a half odd years since I've been a Cornwall councillor. So I'll list them all off, and I hope you remember them, because I think I want to comment a little bit on almost every one that you spoke about. But the challenging access to further and higher education for our youth and people that want to access that education, it is a real big one for me, because especially in Bude, I see that any people that want to access further or higher education have got a minimum realistic 1 hour bus trip either way at the beginning and end of each day. And that's quite a lot to expect of sort of a 16, 17, 18-year-old person that's perhaps just starting out. There are two things on my mind, one of which is the funding of colleges. I don't think seems to be equitable at the moment, because if you look at how the funding streams come into colleges, it forces them to make quite odd decisions about the way they deliver courses and the strategies that they have on the selection of course material that they offer, because they simply want to put bums on seats, and there's no deeper consideration of a wider strategy to equipping a workforce that's appropriate for the region and the area. I also wonder whether or not the funding model makes colleges have to have centralised bases, because my own community in Bude is probably never ever going to have access to that level of education. And I've often wondered whether or not it would be possible to have outreach education facilities. For example, like you have these quite workspaces principle which is going on at the moment, and I think there's a massive future for that, and I think that we need to have shared education facilities, so that maybe you could have a nice place, you know, in our communities that's equipped to look after 15 or 20 people, but perhaps all studying different things, and they could have one convener, one person looking after them. That to me could be the future of further and higher education for communities, and making it accessible to communities. I don't think there's any need for people always to have to go places to receive that education. I'm sure they could do it remotely. Economic output, I think was quite interesting what you're talking about that. You're talking about house price correlation between average wage in Cornwall as well, and it makes it very difficult for our own key workers to access sensible housing. And I wondered if you're a supporter of the principle of key worker housing accommodation, and I wondered if you're a supporter of the principle of community land trusts. When you talked about businesses and people relocating to the southwest, we had a really interesting session last week on this, and it was suggested that one of the key drivers of businesses actually working decently in rural areas was access to really good quality broadband and internet connections. And although we've done really well in Cornwall, I think we could go further again and make our access to the internet really world-class level, especially seeing as we have to accommodate most of the transatlantic cables that serve the internet to the UK on our shores here. It would be nice to think that perhaps our communities were benefiting from that as well. Tourism, blue flag beaches, and you're talking about water quality. I would love us to be seriously considering extending the swimming season, because in these days people have got wetsuits. It's not like in my youth when you got a little plywood surfboard and went in your shorts. You can go in the water quite comfortably all year round now, and I think the swimming season absolutely needs to be extended, and the water quality associated with the swimming season needs to be extended as well. Cycleways connecting communities, absolutely. I think again Cornwall is faced at the moment with an opportunity to deliver a world-class cycle network, and there's no reason why Cornwall shouldn't be the outdoor place for this country. I think we're almost there already, but we could build on that and make it really very, very special. And your last item that you spoke about was buses and connectivity. I'm afraid I don't quite share your enthusiasm here in Bude, because it ain't quite as good as that. But anyway, if you'd like to comment on any or all of them, I'd really appreciate it.
Thank you. So let's start with the colleges. So yeah, I fully acknowledge the point about Bude being an outlier. I mean, the statistics I saw when they presented Callyworth as an option was that many of the people in Bude were accessing Truro and were on the bus for an hour and 50, both, you know, an hour and 50 there and an hour and 50 back. So although we've cut the journey times in half with the new campus in Bodmin, I do think there's an opportunity, and there's a lot of people in Bude accessing that college, by the way. But I do think that, and you know that anyway, Peter. Sorry, but I do accept that there's a possibility for an outreach program. You know, they are making their way up through the spine of Cornwall. So you know, if they are going to do an outreach program, Bude would be a perfect place to be able to do that from. On your point about community land trusts, very supportive of community land trusts and self-build housing. You know, I've seen firsthand how they've been delivered in places like St Mimber. They work exceptionally well. There's a real opportunity for us there going forward to utilise that for delivering key worker housing, which I fully support. You know, some of the challenges we've had with retainment of GPs and nurses in places like Bude Stratton has been predominantly around not having access to housing. So if you've got an option of providing a house on public sector land, then you get that retention and retainment of staff. So yeah, very supportive of that. On the cycleways, yeah, Cornwall is an outdoor area. People are starting to see that that public open space, you know, if they weren't already aware, Cornwall is a perfect place to spend time in the outdoors. So, you know, I was on a meeting with the banks recently, and they were suggesting that the properties that seem to be moving the fastest in Cornwall at the moment are the properties over £600,000. I would suggest that people are reassessing how they want to live their life, and they're now looking at relocating their businesses and their work to and their lives to Cornwall. So if we can get some of those second homes back into use with people buying them and living in them 24/7, that all flows through the local economy. So that's not a bad thing, I don't think. So yeah, was there another point that I missed there, Peter, or did I cover it?
Swimming season.
Yeah. So in the Environment Bill, there's a clause around water management plans, and in those water management plans, there will be an obligation, I think, from what I haven't seen the bill yet, but I think there's an obligation on water companies to test for longer into the year, which is what Surfers Against Sewage have been calling for a long time. And once we get those test results, we'll know exactly how many combined sewer overflow discharges we get throughout the year. I think it's our job to clean this up. You know, for me, it's not good enough that we have discharges throughout the year. We're heavily reliant on a Victorian sewage system, and we should be trying to divert some of that surface water runoff so it's not in the sewage system, in the combined sewers, and being discharged into the sea. So there is movement in the water management plan, and I think, you know, we talk about what sells in Cornwall. You know, our blue flag beaches are probably our flag in the map, and if we get that, if we carry on with our approach and improving water quality, I think we can be an exemplar for not just the rest of the Europe, but for the world, really, in terms of what we can do with our beaches.
Yeah, Brad, thanks, Scott. Thanks. It's been really useful. I'm really glad that almost every point you spoke about was something that was on my mind anyway. So that's really good. That's really good. Scott, we do need to try and squeeze sort of the top 3 interventions that you believe the Cornwall Council could consider, and you did give us the devolution of licensing powers as your number 1, but would you want to put forward a couple of others?
Yeah, sure. So let me just expand on the licensing stuff if I can. So organisations like Leapalooza and others have to apply for a temporary event notice, and I think if Cornwall Council had the ability to be more flexible in their licensing powers, they might be able to encourage events in communities and support, you know, local employment through some of those events. So I think that's an area we can. And on Jane's point earlier on around the sale of food, you know, what we've learned during COVID with the relaxation of some of those licensing powers is that, and we probably knew this before, but Cornish people are very resourceful. And if you give them the ability to be able to be resourceful, they will find ways of getting product to market. So I think we could explore that through devolved licensing powers. In terms of 2 other areas which I think Cornwall Council should explore, I think you should have a separate planning policy for economic development in the countryside. I think at the moment, having the Town and Country Planning Act, considering applications that are both rural and urban in the same way, really does preclude economic development in the countryside. Now, I'm not suggesting that we concrete over huge swathes of farmland, but we've got some less good agricultural land out there that could be utilised for all sorts of ingenious economic opportunities in rural areas. And I think we should try and embrace that as much as we can through the planning process. So I know you have supplementary planning guidance. I'd encourage you to kind of look at how you could expand that in rural communities to help support jobs and growth in villages and towns. And lastly, how can we? So I think having Cornwall Council support for both bluefin tuna, I'm going to squeeze 2 in, both in terms of the plan for bluefin tuna and the plan for the water management plans would be particularly useful, I think. Sorry,
when you say water management, do you mean the extent, the the swimming season and water quality?
In terms of combined sewer overflows, dealing with the challenges around water companies distributing sewage into the sea because they can't manage because the Victorian system doesn't manage.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so Jane or Jim? Jim, yes, I see your hand.
Pete, thank you. Scott, just in relation to the rural sort of planning side of things, I'm fortunate enough to chair something called the Penwith Landscape Partnership Board, which has been in receipt of about £3 million worth of lottery and other funding, a little bit from Cornwall Council. And one of the things we're actively working on down the very far west is planning policy in relation to bringing back redundant farm buildings in particular. So looking at seeing whether we can change some of the way in which sort of more isolated areas are treated in planning terms, because it's obviously easier in terms of succession planning for farmers if they have the space to expand. It's obviously easier for people to work where they live, where there's little transport. So is that something you'd be interested in seeing as and when that emerges? Because we've probably one or two case studies already, but it'll be a year or two before the final policy is developed. But I'll put you in touch then, or your office in touch with the guys doing that.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah, very much look forward to seeing that.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, and Jane?
I just wanted to add to that, Scott. Actually, I see on my planning committee many times where planning is refused when it's a situation of the next generation wanting to take over the large farmhouse and the retiring parents, but are still able to help on the farm. And sometimes that's necessary because of diversification, and also, sometimes to make ends meet, younger farmers are going out and doing other jobs. It might be land agents or whatever. And we're always up against this because they say, oh well, they can't build in the countryside. Well, not often are they asking for that, but they're very often asking for conversion of barns or derelict buildings or Q class. And I'm seeing a lot of Q classes now getting turned down out of hand, which doesn't come to committee. And you think, well, what a shame, because I think it has to be a generational thing now on some of these farms to make it work and to make it stack up. And so I don't know if there's any, wriggle room for the policies when you're talking about it up there. I don't know, but it is becoming a bit of a problem. And we get remarks like, oh, well, they can live in a caravan. Well, actually, why should they? They're one of our hardest working jobs. Fishing and farming, it couldn't be harder. Why should they live in a caravan? I mean, absolutely not. So, anything there you can do to help would be great.
Yeah, no, absolutely taking your point on board, especially the one around generational farming. People wanting to take over, and sometimes the father's moving. He wants to hand it over to the children, and he's not able to do that because he hasn't got anywhere that he can move into to vacate the farmhouse to get them in. So yeah.
And it's a family thing too. I mean, sometimes the grandparents, they're picking up children, picking up parts, picking up eggs, feeding the rabbit. I don't know what, whatever, feeding various stock for them, because these days young people lead very, very busy and stressful lives, don't they? So I think we need to think about that, and it's sort of a European way, really, isn't it? They're generational, families living and doing things together, and I think we should perhaps be more mindful of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Agreed.
Okay, so Scott, thank you ever so much indeed. I really appreciate you joining us. It's been very, very useful. One of the statistics that was given to us earlier by the first gentleman that was with us, Edward Richardson, he said that something like £3.5 billion worth of profit revenue was attributable to farming industry, but equally the government subsidies to farming was around about the same figure. So farming was like a net zero profit business, and I think somehow, certainly at government level, we need to rediscover the actual value of what the food chain actually is, and the value of the people that work so hard and provide so much of our community spirit, especially in rural areas and villages. So I know that's not something you're going to be able to change tomorrow, but if you ever get the opportunity to talk about that, I certainly would appreciate it. And I think the necessity to bring expectations of food prices up somewhat probably is realistically going to happen. But at the same time, I think somehow we need to, I don't want to say disempower the big supermarkets, but I think there is far too much power in far too fewer hands on food prices and farm gate prices. And I think that needs to be looked at very, very strongly. So
I think we can make food more convenient in Cornwall than people going to the supermarkets. You know, I actually think at this moment in time, people are moving, maybe not during COVID, but maybe pre-COVID, they were starting to move to basket shops, having a supermarket shop every 2 weeks and a basket shop every other day for like little bits and pieces. And if we can find a way on the council to facilitate that happening, it doesn't necessarily need to be through a supermarket, but through a farm shop or whatever. I think there's a real opportunity there to kind of shorten those supply chain miles, cut the carbon, and actually get that money exactly where it needs to be, because the second you start cutting supply chains, you start increasing profit margin.
Can I just ask, going back on that, Peter, if you don't mind, can I just ask about what you feel about, we lost a lot of local small abattoirs due to EU regulations, a particularly good one near us in South East Cornwall. And now farmers tell me they have to, if they want lambs to go to slaughter, they're having to truck all the way up to the other side of Launceston. Is there any movement that you think that regulations might alter, that they will be able to open more locally? Because that would stop a lot of food miles too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, really good question, Jane. So DEFRA are already doing an inquiry in terms of how far animals have to travel to be slaughtered. And I know that we've got 2 mobile slaughtermen that work in Cornwall at the moment, but at this moment in time, because of the nature of an animal being killed on the farm, outside of the slaughterhouses, they're only allowed to let that meat be supplied on the farm. So I think, you know, we have to make it easier for farmers to be able to do those kind of things, you know, so that they can supply that meat direct. And then they get all the added value for that. So yeah, I'm a big supporter of having animals. If they're going to be killed for meat, they should be killed as close to home as possible. You know, putting that animal through the distress of having to go on big long journeys to slaughterhouses is just ridiculous. And if we can make that process, shorten that process, and make it easier for animals to be slaughtered either on farm or very close to farm, then I think we like you said, we shorten the supply chain, we cut the carbon, and we increase the profit margin for the farmers, and that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, that's why I'm sorry to lose any sort of form of market facility in South East Cornwall. We only really need a small facility, but we could have a little rural hub where there is slaughterhouse as well. So like in the old days when it went to Liscard Market, went to FMC to the slaughterhouse and back on wraps and slab. And I think we should be looking at going back to that. But I mean, my farmers are all really unhappy. They've got to go so far to market because they can't afford to be away the farm so long. So, you know, it's something I do keep banging the drum about, but I'm not getting anywhere with it. But thank you.
I think the legislation will be coming on that. I definitely think that legislation on how far animals are transported is definitely coming. So we'll have to find a better local solution, and that will be better for all of our communities in terms of the output.
Okay, so Scott, I've already sort of done the thanks, but I'll do it again. Thank you very much. It's been
absolute
great.
Pleasure. Nice to see you all.
Good to have you back. Good to have you serving back on Cornwall Council. Well done.
Yes.
See you all soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Right. Okay. Lynn, would you like us to reconvene in a different meeting, or should we stay in this one?
Can we just switch the record off and stay in this one?
Yeah, I think we can stay here if you like, as instructed by the chairman.
Okay. Yes, you're instructed to.
All right, I'll stop the recording. So the recording is going to stop now.
Pete, I've got to go.